Welcome to 3 a.m. Static. In the stillness of the night, when the world sleeps, the static whispers. Here, we unearth the forgotten, the forbidden, and the unsettling. Tonight's stories will crawl beneath your skin and nest in your thoughts. So turn off the lights, close your eyes, and let the static guide you. Before we begin, let us know where and when you're listening from. Drop your country or the exact time you're tuning in, because at 3 a.m., you're never really alone.
Story 1, The Mimic. The forest floor crunched under their boots, a rhythmic counterpoint to the rustling leaves overhead. Sunlight, fractured by the dense canopy, dappled the path ahead, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. David, ever the pragmatist, led the way, his compass held steady in his hand. Lily, trailing behind, hummed a cheerful tune, a stark contrast to the growing unease that prickled at Emily's skin. Tom, ever silent, sketched furiously in his notebook, capturing the play of light and shadow with uncanny accuracy. They had ventured deeper into the woods than intended, lured by the promise of a hidden waterfall, a secluded haven whispered about in local legends. The air grew heavy, the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves thick in their nostrils. A strange silence descended, punctuated only by the occasional snap of a twig or the distant call of a bird. It was a silence that felt oppressive, heavy with an unspoken menace. Then, they saw it. At first, it seemed innocuous, a small creature moving amongst the undergrowth, its form obscured by the shadows. It mimicked the rustle of leaves, a subtle imitation that went unnoticed until it repeated, mirroring the sound of their footsteps with uncanny precision. They paused, exchanging wary glances. The creature emerged from the shadows, small and vaguely rabbit-like, with large, luminous eyes that seemed to absorb the light. It hopped forward, its movements eerily mirroring Lily's, mimicking her gait with unsettling accuracy. A nervous laugh escaped Lily's lips. "Look at that," she exclaimed, pointing at the creature. "It's mimicking us." David chuckled, a dismissive sound. "Probably just a coincidence," he said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. Even he felt a prickle of unease, a sense of something wrong, something deeply unsettling about the creature's actions. Tom, however, was silent, his eyes fixed on the creature with a growing intensity. He continued to sketch, his hand moving with a feverish speed, capturing the creature's unsettling grace, its unnerving mimicry. The creature continued its imitation, mirroring their movements with increasingly disturbing accuracy. It copied David's deliberate stride, mimicking the swing of his arms, the subtle shift of his weight. When Emily stumbled over a root, the creature stumbled in perfect synchronization, a mirrored reflection of her awkwardness. The mimicry became more pronounced, more sinister. It wasn't just mimicking their physical actions, it was mirroring their emotions, their anxieties. When Lily's laughter faltered, the creature stilled, its large eyes fixed on her with an unsettling intensity. When Tom's brow furrowed in concentration, the creature mirrored the expression, its face twisting into an almost human-like frown. As they walked, the creature followed, its presence a constant, unsettling reminder of their own movements. It was as if they were being observed, mirrored, every action, every thought reflected back at them with a chilling fidelity. The forest seemed to close in around them, the shadows growing longer, darker, more menacing. The dappled sunlight became less frequent, replaced by a growing twilight that seemed to deepen with every passing moment. They tried to ignore it, to dismiss it as a trick of the light, a figment of their imaginations. But the creature persisted, its mimicry growing more disturbing, its presence more palpable. The playful imitation had evolved into something far more sinister, something that bordered on predatory. It moved with a disconcerting fluidity, its movements impossible, unnatural, as if it were not bound by the laws of physics. The closer they got to the supposed waterfall, the more intense the mimicry became. The forest was growing thick with mist, the air thick with an otherworldly scent that stung the nostrils and tasted of damp earth and decaying things. The trail blurred into a series of uneven, mossy rocks and thick undergrowth. The creature, now almost always hidden in the shadows, moved with the strange uncanny timing that suggested it had a profound grasp of their every intention. The silence now felt charged with something malevolent, a tangible presence that seemed to press in on them from all sides. They reached a clearing, the waterfall hidden behind a curtain of mist. The creature emerged from the shadows, larger now, its form less rabbit-like, more vaguely humanoid. Its eyes, still luminous, burned with an unnatural light, reflecting the eerie glow of the mist. It stood silently, mimicking their stillness, mirroring their apprehension. Then, it moved, its movements fluid and unsettlingly fast. It stretched out a long, thin arm, its fingers impossibly long and delicate, reaching out towards Lily. Lily screamed, her eyes wide with terror. David lunged forward, pushing her behind him, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife strapped to his belt. But the creature was too fast, too fluid. It vanished before David could react, leaving behind only the chilling silence and the unsettling sense of being watched. The air felt heavy with a tangible dread. They stood frozen, their hearts pounding in their chests. The waterfall, finally visible through the thinning mist, seemed to hum with a low, resonant drone. The forest, once beautiful, now felt threatening, menacing, the trees seeming to lean in, closing in, as if the forest itself were a living entity, complicit in the creature's unsettling game. The mimicry had ceased, but the feeling of being observed, of being mirrored, persisted, a chilling reminder of their encounter with something far beyond their comprehension. They turned and fled, the sounds of their retreat echoing through the eerily silent woods, their steps measured and cautious, the memory of the creature's unsettling mimicry burning itself into their minds. The woods themselves seemed to be holding their breath, waiting. The game, they knew, was far from over. The forest deepened, the sunlight a mere memory as twilight descended prematurely, painting the woods in shades of deep violet and ominous gray. The air grew colder, a damp chill seeping into their bones, a stark contrast to the stifling humidity they'd experienced earlier. The path, once relatively clear, became a treacherous labyrinth of tangled roots and uneven stones, forcing them to move slowly, cautiously. Each step was measured, each breath held, as if a sudden sound, a misplaced footfall, could shatter the fragile peace and unleash the unseen horror lurking just beyond their perception. The mimicry continued, but it had evolved. It was no longer a simple mirroring of their actions, it was a perverse reflection of their inner turmoil. Lily, initially amused, was now visibly shaken, her cheerful humming replaced by a low, anxious whimper. Each time she stumbled, the unseen creature stumbled, mirroring not only the physical act but the underlying fear and vulnerability. David's usual confidence was replaced by a growing unease. His every attempt to appear strong, to maintain control, was met with a subtle yet chilling mimicry, highlighting his inner struggle against encroaching fear. Even Tom, the stoic artist, seemed affected. His sketching, once meticulous and precise, became frantic, the lines blurring and overlapping, reflecting the chaotic thoughts swirling in his mind. Emily, the most acutely sensitive to the creature's presence, felt a growing dread clutching at her heart. She felt observed, not just by the creature itself, but by the forest itself, as if the ancient trees were complicit in this unsettling game. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, seemed deliberate, designed to heighten her anxiety. The silence, punctuated by the distant drip of water from unseen sources, was a living entity, a palpable pressure pressing in on them, suffocating them with its weight. The creature remained elusive, mostly unseen, yet its presence was omnipresent. It moved in the shadows, a silent specter mirroring their every fear, amplifying their anxieties with unsettling precision. They would hear a twig snap behind them, only to turn and find nothing but shadows and the deep, unnerving stillness of the woods. A low growl, almost imperceptible, would ripple through the air, mirroring the rising panic in their hearts. They began to feel a disturbing connection to the unseen creature, a shared consciousness, an unnerving empathy that sent chills down their spines. As they pressed onward, the waterfall's resonant hum grew louder, a low, throbbing pulse that seemed to resonate in their very bones. The mist thickened, clinging to them like a shroud, obscuring the path ahead. The air itself seemed to vibrate with a palpable energy, a potent blend of dread and anticipation. They were no longer just walking, they were being pulled, drawn inexorably towards the source of the unsettling humming, the heart of the creature's domain. David, attempting to regain control, tried to speak, to break the suffocating silence, but his voice was little more than a strained whisper lost in the dense mist. He attempted to reassure the others, but his own fear betrayed him, his voice trembling slightly. His words felt inadequate, powerless against the growing dread that enveloped them. Lily's fear reached a crescendo. Her whimpers turned into sobs, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The creature, always just out of sight, mirrored her terror, her every tremor and gasp seeming to echo in the unseen presence. She began to plead, her voice barely a whisper lost in the ominous sounds of the forest. Her prayers were a mirror of her despair, a reflection of her helplessness. Tom, ever the observer, continued to sketch, his hand moving in a frenzied dance across the pages of his notebook. His art had devolved into a chaotic representation of their escalating fear, capturing not only the physical horror but the visceral terror that gripped their souls. Each stroke of his pencil reflected the mounting intensity of the unseen threat, echoing their growing despair. Emily, her own terror almost paralyzing, felt a deep, instinctive understanding of the creature's intent. It wasn't just mirroring them, it was feeding off their fear, absorbing their anxieties, growing stronger with each manifestation of their dread. She felt a deep, primal fear, the instinctive terror one feels when confronting something fundamentally wrong, something that defies human comprehension. She tried to speak, but her vocal cords seemed paralyzed by fear, only broken whimpers escaping her lips. They finally broke through the mist, the waterfall now before them, a chaotic torrent of water cascading down the cliff face. The air vibrated with the raw power of the water, but it was not just the sound of the waterfall, it was the low, resonant hum, amplified now, vibrating within the very fabric of the world around them. It was a sound that felt ancient, primal, the heartbeat of something deeply sinister. The creature emerged then, not a small, rabbit-like form, but a towering, grotesque silhouette against the churning water. It was impossibly tall, its limbs elongated and distorted, its form shifting and changing, defying any semblance of natural anatomy. Its eyes, large and luminous, burned with an unnatural light, reflecting the eerie glow of the waterfall. It moved with impossible speed, fluid and graceful, yet terrifying in its unnatural grace, a being that seemed unbound by the laws of physics. The mimicry ceased. The game was over. The creature was not mirroring their emotions anymore, it was actively feeding on them. The silence of the forest was gone, replaced by the deafening roar of the waterfall, a relentless sonic assault that mirrored the chaos in their hearts. They were trapped, surrounded, facing the full, terrible reality of their encounter, and the realization that their fears were only the beginning of something far worse. The creature moved towards them, and the forest itself seemed to shudder, as if in anticipation. Their screams were swallowed by the roar of the water, their fate sealed in the cold, indifferent embrace of the uncanny. The roar of the waterfall was a physical force, pushing against them, a constant, deafening pressure that amplified the already overwhelming sense of dread. As the creature advanced, its impossibly long limbs moving with a disturbing fluidity, the group, previously united in their terror, began to fracture. A gust of wind, sharper and colder than before, ripped through the mist, separating them. Lily, still sobbing, stumbled backward, her foot catching on a treacherous root. She fell, scraping her knees and hands on the jagged rocks. The creature, its form flickering and shifting, paused momentarily, as if considering its next move. This brief hesitation, this momentary lull in the escalating terror, was more terrifying than any direct attack. It allowed for a chilling thought to take root. The creature was toying with them, savoring their fear. Lily screamed again, a desperate, high-pitched sound swallowed by the roar of the water. She scrambled to her feet, blindly running, disappearing into the swirling mist. David, his face pale and drawn, tried to call out to her, but his voice was lost in the cacophony. He reached out to Tom, who was still sketching, his hands shaking uncontrollably, his eyes wide with a stark, chilling terror. The artist's frantic scribbles seemed to capture the very essence of their predicament, a chaotic dance of lines that mirrored the unpredictable nature of their pursuer. But even Tom, usually so focused, seemed paralyzed by the sheer terror of it all. He was unable to respond to David's desperate calls, lost in his own silent struggle against encroaching madness. Emily, meanwhile, felt a cold dread grip her heart. She was alone, separated from the others, the mist swirling around her like a malevolent spirit. The sounds of the waterfall were deafening, masking any other sound, creating an isolating bubble of terror around her. She felt watched, hunted, the creature's presence a tangible weight pressing down on her. She pressed herself against the cold, damp rock face, trying to become one with the shadows, to disappear from its sight. The air vibrated with a low hum, resonating within her bones, a primal rhythm that mirrored the frantic beating of her heart. The separation fostered a chilling paranoia. Each hiker, alone in the unforgiving embrace of the forest, began to question the intentions of the others. Had Lily's fall been accidental, or had she been pushed? Had Tom's silence been a result of terror, or was he secretly collaborating with the creature? Even David, their self-proclaimed leader, found himself doubting the sincerity of his companions. Was it fear that fueled this distrust, or something more sinister? The mimicry had fractured their unity, replacing it with a cold, isolating suspicion. David, trying to regain his bearings, stumbled through the mist, the ground shifting beneath his feet, the forest floor becoming an unpredictable, menacing landscape. Each shadow held the potential for the creature, each rustle of leaves threatened to reveal its presence. He called out for Emily and Tom, his voice raspy and strained, but only the roar of the waterfall answered. He pressed onward, the waterfall's hum a constant, unsettling reminder of the creature's proximity. He found himself surrounded by an eerie silence, save for the constant barrage of water. The mist was dense enough to disorient him, turning the forest into a disorienting maze that felt designed to trap him. Every step was an exercise in paranoia, each shadow a potential threat, each sound a potential signal of the creature's approach. Tom, overwhelmed by the escalating terror, found himself trapped in a small, shadowed alcove. The creature's presence was strongest here, a palpable sense of dread hanging heavy in the air. He struggled to sketch, his hand trembling too much to maintain any semblance of control. His drawings became increasingly abstract, a chaotic representation of his own disintegrating sanity. He felt a strange sense of connection to the creature, a perverse empathy that horrified him. It felt like the creature was not just mirroring his fear, it was absorbing it, fueling itself on his despair. He could feel his mind unraveling, the forest's darkness seeping into his thoughts, corrupting his sense of reality. Emily, clinging to the rock face, felt the mist press against her, the chilling dampness clinging to her skin like a shroud. She felt a cold presence, a shadow, moving silently just beyond her range of vision. She remained motionless, her breath held, attempting to become invisible, to vanish into the mist and the rock. But the creature's presence felt omnipresent, a constant pressure on her mind, a weight that threatened to crush her soul. The world had dissolved into a symphony of noise and fear, the deafening roar of the waterfall blending with the pounding in her ears and the growing fear in her heart. Hours seemed to pass in this nightmarish isolation. The hikers, separated and alone, fought not only the creature but also their own escalating paranoia and despair. The forest itself seemed to have become an active participant in the hunt, its every sound and shadow designed to amplify their terror. The mimicry had mutated, transforming from simple mirroring into a full-fledged psychological assault. As darkness descended fully, the mist became even denser. The chilling dampness felt like the cold embrace of the grave. The hikers were lost, alone, each facing their own version of a chilling hell. The shared horror had fractured into a series of personal nightmares, each more terrifying than the last. The mimic, its form shifting and changing, remained elusive, a ghost lurking in the shadows, playing a terrifying game of cat and mouse, fueling the ever-increasing fear and paranoia of its victims. The isolating darkness of the woods pressed in, a crushing weight on their minds and souls, a tangible manifestation of their growing dread. The separation had not broken them, it had amplified their individual vulnerability. Each hiker was now facing the horror alone, each forced to grapple with the horrifying realization that the creature was not just hunting their bodies, it was actively devouring their minds. The unseen entity was not just a mimic but a predator, feeding on the very essence of their being, their fear, their hope, and their sanity. The forest itself was complicit, a silent observer, a shadowy witness to their impending doom. The chilling realization dawned slowly, like the creeping tendrils of a poisonous vine. It wasn't a sudden, explosive revelation, but rather a gradual, chilling understanding that settled over them like a shroud of ice. David, still lost in the maze of the forest, stumbled upon a clearing bathed in an unnatural, phosphorescent glow. In the center, partially obscured by the swirling mist, was a grotesque, pulsating mass, a grotesque amalgamation of organic matter, a writhing, sentient slime mold that pulsed with a sickly green light. It was repulsive, beautiful in its own horrifying way, its surface rippling with patterns that resembled distorted faces, a macabre tapestry woven from fear and despair. As he approached cautiously, the humming intensified, resonating deep within his chest, vibrating his bones with a disturbing resonance. The closer he got, the more he understood. This was the source, the heart of the mimicry. This was the creature's nest, its lair. The faces on the pulsating mass seemed to writhe and shift, mimicking his own rising fear and panic. He felt a nauseating wave of empathy for the creature, a terrifying connection that chilled him to the core. It wasn't just mimicking fear, it was feeding on it. It was a parasitic entity, a living horror that subsisted on the emotional essence of its victims. The phosphorescent glow illuminated fragments of what looked like ancient, decaying bones, intertwined within the pulsating mass. These weren't just animal bones, some were distinctly human, fragmented and distorted, seemingly absorbed into the creature's grotesque body. A chill of profound horror ran through David. He realized the creature wasn't merely mimicking, it was assimilating, absorbing the very essence of those it preyed upon, incorporating their memories, their fears, their identities into its own monstrous form. The horrifying implication struck him with the force of a physical blow. The mimic wasn't born of this forest. It was a parasitic entity, a sentient plague, drawn to places of intense emotion, feeding off despair, fear, and desperation. The waterfall wasn't just a convenient location, it was an amplifier, a resonator that magnified the emotional energy, drawing the creature in, feeding its insatiable hunger. The forest itself wasn't merely a backdrop, it was a willing accomplice, a twisted symbiotic relationship between nature and this chilling entity. Meanwhile, Emily, still clinging to the rock face, heard a faint whisper in the mist, a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It was a chorus of voices, fragmented, distorted, yet somehow familiar. The voices were her own, the echoes of past fears, past traumas, anxieties she had long suppressed. The mimic wasn't just mimicking her fear, it was dredging up her deepest insecurities, twisting them into weapons against her. The whisper intensified, becoming a torrent of self-doubt and dread, aimed to break her spirit, to unravel her sanity. She felt a desperate urge to succumb, to surrender to the insidious voice, to become one with the creature's terrifying energy. Tom, in his shadowed alcove, experienced a different kind of horror. The creature's presence had become overwhelming, a physical weight pressing down on him, squeezing the air from his lungs. He felt its presence inside him, a cold, creeping tendril probing his mind, probing memories, emotions, twisting them into nightmarish parodies. He saw visions, fragmented glimpses of past lives intertwined with his own, the lives of those absorbed by the mimic, their fears and experiences becoming a part of his own tortured consciousness. His sanity was crumbling, his identity dissolving into a chaotic mixture of disparate lives, merging and blurring in a terrifying ballet of terror. Lily, running blindly through the mist, felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. It was a false calm, a cruel deception, a momentary lull before the storm. The mimic, having absorbed a significant part of her fear, had lost some of its intensity towards her. It was a strategy, a calculated manipulation, a lull to lure her into a false sense of security before unleashing a renewed wave of terror. The creature had learned from her terror, and she was now a pawn in a far more sinister game. As the night deepened, the individual experiences began to intertwine, their fears and nightmares converging into a horrifying symphony of dread. The mimic, having fed on their despair, had grown stronger, its form shifting and expanding, its influence spreading throughout the forest. It was no longer simply mimicking their fear, it was weaving their individual terrors into a horrifying tapestry, a collective nightmare that threatened to engulf them all. The horrifying truth was revealed in the final, chilling encounter. The hikers, drawn together by a shared instinct for survival, found themselves facing the mimic in its full, terrifying glory. It was a colossal mass of writhing flesh and bone, a grotesque amalgamation of their individual fears, their identities twisted and merged into a monstrous whole. The creature was not just feeding on their fear, it was absorbing their very essence, their memories, their personalities, their lives. Its surface rippled with faces, their faces, the faces of those it had consumed before, a horrifying testament to its parasitic nature. It was a living monument to their collective despair, a monstrous reflection of their combined fears, a grotesque mirror reflecting back the deepest darkness of their souls. The creature wasn't merely a mimic, it was a predator that consumed not just flesh and blood, but souls, memories, and identities. The hikers faced their final choice: surrender to the horror, to become one with the creature, to lose their individual identities within its monstrous form, or fight, even knowing the odds were overwhelmingly against them, to cling to the last vestiges of their humanity. The forest, once a sanctuary, had become a monstrous accomplice, an unwitting participant in this chilling, parasitic ritual. The waterfall, the sounds, the mist, all worked in concert with the creature, to amplify fear, and to consume. The very essence of the woods had been poisoned, transformed into a breeding ground for this horrifying entity, a dark reflection of humanity's deepest fears made manifest. The mimic's true nature was chilling in its simplicity, yet horrifying in its implications. It was a testament to the power of fear, a reflection of our own vulnerability, a warning against the darkness that lurks within, and the horrifying consequences of unchecked despair. The parasitic creature was not merely a mimic, it was a living embodiment of our deepest anxieties, a chilling reflection of our own potential for self-destruction. The forest held its breath, anticipating the inevitable climax, a chilling symphony of fear and despair reaching its dreadful crescendo. The hikers, united in their terror, faced their final, horrifying reckoning. The creature, having consumed their fears, had become a living embodiment of their deepest nightmares. Their struggle was not just for survival, it was a battle for their very souls. The forest floor, slick with damp leaves and shadowed by the oppressive canopy, became their treacherous battleground. David, fueled by adrenaline and a primal instinct to survive, led the desperate flight. His lungs burned, his muscles screamed in protest, yet he pushed onward, the chilling rasp of the mimic's approach echoing in his ears like a death knell. The phosphorescent glow, a sickly green beacon in the deepening twilight, pulsed in the distance, a horrifying reminder of the creature's proximity. Emily, her fingers raw and bleeding from her desperate climb, scrambled after him, her mind a maelstrom of fear and self-doubt. The whispering voices, the insidious echoes of her own anxieties, still gnawed at her, threatening to pull her under, to break her spirit and surrender her to the creature's will. Each rustle of leaves, each snap of a twig, sent icy bolts of terror through her, amplifying her already frantic heart rate. The forest seemed to conspire against them, its shadows lengthening, its sounds twisting into mocking whispers. Tom, his vision still plagued by fragmented memories and distorted visions, stumbled along, his steps clumsy and uncoordinated. The creature's touch, a chilling tendril of dread, still lingered in his mind, twisting his thoughts, manipulating his perceptions. He felt himself fragmenting, dissolving into a terrifying collage of disparate lives, a horrifying kaleidoscope of fear and despair. He clung to the edge of sanity, a fragile thread in the fabric of his collapsing mind. Lily, surprisingly, found a reservoir of strength within herself. The creature's temporary lull, its calculated manipulation, had been a miscalculation. She wasn't broken, she was merely biding her time, waiting for an opportunity to strike back. Her fear, partially absorbed by the mimic, had been replaced by a cold, calculating fury. The creature's underestimation of her resolve would prove to be its fatal flaw. The chase became a nightmarish ballet of evasion and pursuit. They scrambled over fallen logs, plunged through thickets of thorny bushes, their clothes torn, their bodies bruised, their minds teetering on the brink of madness. The mimic, a grotesque, ever-shifting mass of flesh and bone, pursued them relentlessly, its form expanding and contracting, its presence a suffocating wave of dread that seemed to crush the very air around them. The sounds of the forest amplified their terror. The rustling leaves whispered secrets of their impending doom, the wind howled like a banshee, and the distant waterfall roared its chilling symphony of despair. The ground itself seemed to vibrate with the creature's approach, a tangible manifestation of its terrifying power. At one point, David, desperately searching for an escape route, stumbled upon a narrow ravine, its sides choked with tangled vines and overshadowed by a massive, ancient oak. He saw a glimmer of hope, a chance to lose the creature in the maze-like depths of the ravine. He urged the others to follow, pushing them forward, ignoring their protests and pleas of exhaustion. The mimic, momentarily losing sight of them in the dense undergrowth, momentarily slowed, allowing them to gain precious ground. But the respite was short-lived. The creature, sensing their escape, unleashed a wave of psychic energy that seemed to lash out at them, sending jolts of raw terror through their minds. Emily, momentarily overwhelmed, stumbled, her resolve cracking under the assault. The whispering voices intensified, their insidious whispers aimed at shattering her already frail resolve. Tom, his mind reeling, felt the familiar tendrils of the creature's presence probing his memories, twisting his perceptions, threatening to unravel his sanity. Lily, however, stood firm, her rage shielding her from the psychic attack. She grasped Emily's arm, pulling her back from the edge of despair, reminding her of their shared struggle, their shared need for survival. The chase continued, the relentless pursuit a nightmarish dance of death. They stumbled through a thicket of thorny bushes, their clothes shredded, their bodies bleeding, their spirits fractured. The forest, once a place of beauty and serenity, had become a terrifying labyrinth, a nightmare made manifest. They were nearing the edge of the woods, a small clearing visible in the distance, a sliver of hope in the oppressive darkness. But as they approached, they realized that the clearing was a trap. The mimic, having anticipated their escape route, had set an ambush, its form having vastly expanded, its presence a horrifying wall of flesh and bone. The creature was now impossibly vast, a colossal monstrosity that towered over them, its surface writhing with a multitude of faces, a grotesque tapestry woven from their fears, their memories, their identities. The faces were not only their own but also those of countless others, victims absorbed by the creature's parasitic hunger. The waterfall, the source of the creature's power, echoed nearby, its ceaseless roar a deafening counterpoint to the creature's grotesque symphony of despair. The hikers, exhausted and injured, braced themselves for their final confrontation. Their individual fears, once a source of division, had now forged a bond of desperate unity. They faced their final reckoning, a battle not just for survival but for the preservation of their souls, their identities, their very humanity against this horrifying embodiment of their deepest fears. The air crackled with tension, the silence punctuated only by the creature's unsettling pulsations and the relentless roar of the waterfall. The creature, in its colossal form, loomed over them, a horrifying testament to the power of fear, a grotesque reflection of their collective nightmares. As they prepared to make their last stand, a surprising realization dawned on David. He noticed a peculiar pattern in the creature's pulsating mass, a faint rhythm within its chaotic movements, a vulnerability in its seemingly impenetrable form. It was a tiny crack in the monstrous facade, a glimmer of hope in the suffocating despair. It was a chance, however slim, to fight back. He formulated a desperate plan, a last-ditch effort to exploit the creature's weakness, a gamble that might cost them their lives but could offer a chance for redemption. He whispered his plan to his friends, his voice barely a breath in the suffocating presence of the creature. They exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between them, a silent pact to fight until the very end. The climax of their terrifying ordeal was upon them. The fate of the four hikers, their souls and identities, hung precariously in the balance, suspended on a knife's edge between oblivion and a slim chance for survival. The horrifying chase had reached its culmination, the final confrontation imminent. The forest held its breath, anticipating the dreadful resolution, the chilling culmination of a nightmarish ordeal. Their struggle was not simply a fight for survival, it was a battle for the very essence of their humanity. Story 2, The Last Post. The flickering screen illuminated David's face, casting his features in an unsettling, almost ghostly light. He leaned forward, his breath misting slightly in the cool night air, his eyes glued to the words on the screen. It was a blog post, unearthed by a chance search, a cryptic entry titled The Whispering Woods. The author, identified only as Wanderer, detailed a series of events that mirrored their own terrifying experience with unnerving accuracy. The style was fragmented, the sentences short, staccato bursts of emotion and description that painted a vivid, unsettling picture. The first entry spoke of an unnerving feeling of being watched, a persistent sense of dread that permeated the forest. The writer described the unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional snap of a twig or rustle of leaves, sounds that somehow felt amplified, distorted, laden with a sinister intent. The words themselves seemed to drip with unease, the digital ink imbued with a palpable sense of impending doom. David shivered, despite the warmth of his apartment. This wasn't just a recounting of events, it was a direct transmission of fear, a psychic echo from a shared trauma. The next entry detailed a disturbing encounter with shifting shadows, forms that seemed to materialize and dissolve at the edge of vision. The writer described figures that seemed both human and inhuman, twisted parodies of life, their movements jerky and unnatural, their presence a chilling blend of familiarity and profound alienness. The description was punctuated with frantic exclamations and breathless apologies for fragmented sentences, betraying the writer's increasing panic and disorientation. It felt as if he was writing in a desperate attempt to preserve his sanity, to grapple with something beyond comprehension, something that defied rational explanation. Each sentence was a desperate grasp at clarity amidst a whirlpool of fear and confusion. The blog entries followed a nightmarish trajectory, each entry more horrifying than the last. The writer described the encroaching sense of paranoia, the twisting of familiar sounds and sights into something sinister and malevolent. Familiar sights became tools of fear, twisting into grotesque parodies. The gentle rustling of leaves became a whispered chorus of condemnation, the playful calls of birds twisted into mocking laughter. He described a growing sense of disorientation, a loss of control over his perceptions, his memories, his very sense of self. The forest seemed to be manipulating his mind, twisting his thoughts, playing tricks on his senses, blurring the line between reality and hallucination. He mentioned a strange pulsing light, a sickly green glow that seemed to emanate from the heart of the woods, drawing him closer with an irresistible, terrifying allure. The feeling of being watched intensified, morphing into a horrifying awareness of a sentient presence, an entity that seemed to be feeding off his fear, his anxieties, his very essence. The writer's language grew increasingly erratic, his sentences fragmented, his descriptions more visceral and terrifying. He spoke of voices, whispering insidious suggestions, whispering promises of oblivion, subtly eroding his sanity and will. These whispers seemed to echo his own deepest fears and insecurities, exacerbating his panic and accelerating his descent into madness. He described a sense of fragmentation, a disassociation from himself, a feeling of becoming something less than human, a horrifying transformation orchestrated by the malevolent presence that haunted the woods. There were descriptions of grotesque shapes, shifting forms that defied logical comprehension, and terrifying glimpses of things that shouldn't exist. The descriptions were nightmarish and visceral, painting a picture of an encroaching horror that seeped into the very fabric of reality. The words were sharp, jagged, mirroring the sharp claws of the creature he described. He spoke of a creature that was both a reflection of his deepest fears and an entity beyond human understanding. The creature seemed to bend reality around it, twisting perceptions and creating illusions. The blog entries became shorter, the intervals between them longer. The writer's descent into madness was palpable, the digital record a desperate testament to his struggle against the encroaching terror. The entries were punctuated with frantic apologies, pleas for help, and then silence. The final entry was simply a single, chilling sentence, "It's inside me now." Then, nothing. The blog was abruptly terminated. David stared at the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. The parallels between the Wanderer's experiences and their own were chillingly accurate. The descriptions of the phosphorescent glow, the shifting forms, the whispering voices, the encroaching sense of dread, and the disorientation all mirrored their terrifying encounter with the mimic. The final, chilling sentence sent a shiver down his spine. It implied a horrifying assimilation, a complete absorption by the creature, a loss of self, of identity, a surrender to the horrifying power of the entity. Emily, who had been silently watching over his shoulder, gasped. It's like he was there, with us. He saw it all. She traced the lines of the last entry, her finger trembling slightly. The way he described it, the disorientation, the voices, it's the same. Tom, still struggling to fully grasp the enormity of their experience, spoke in a low, shaky voice. But how could he know? It was just us, right? In the woods, we were alone. His words hung in the air, unanswered. Lily, ever pragmatic, spoke with a calm that belied the unsettling nature of the discovery. This changes everything. If others have experienced this, if this is more than just a single isolated incident, then it means we're not alone in facing this. She leaned closer to the screen, her eyes scanning the blog for any clue, any trace of a location, anything that could provide a further insight into this chilling phenomenon. This chilling blog, this echo of their shared horror, had shifted their perspective, transforming their personal terror into a wider, more frightening enigma. The seemingly isolated incident in the woods suddenly transformed into a terrifying pattern, a recurring nightmare woven into the fabric of reality. The implications were profound and terrifying, suggesting the existence of a malevolent entity far more powerful and pervasive than they could have ever imagined. The blog had opened a new layer of fear, a chilling perspective of the creature. This was not simply a creature of the woods, but an entity of a far more horrifying scope, a creature able to reach out and infect, not only those who witnessed it, but those who only hear its story. The very act of recording the events had become a horrifying channel for this terror, a means for the creature to infect and corrupt. The question lingered, unspoken but heavy in the air. Was the creature using the blog as a means to lure more victims? Was the Wanderer's final entry a warning? A desperate message from the brink of utter annihilation? Or was it a mere testament to the creature's power to corrupt, an echo of its terrifying presence, a grotesque testament to its power to steal identities and souls? The night stretched out before them, filled with the chilling silence of unspoken questions and the looming shadow of an unknown, pervasive threat. The mystery of the Wanderer's final post, the terrifyingly accurate account of their own experience, had opened a new and terrifying chapter in their ordeal. Their fight for survival had now become a fight to understand a darkness that seemed to be far larger, far more ancient, and far more terrifying than anything they could have ever imagined. The woods, once a place of serenity and beauty, had become the terrifying embodiment of an unknown evil, a malevolent force that threatened to consume their very identities. The implications of their discovery, the horror of the Wanderer's final words, hung heavy in the air, promising a future filled with far more chilling mysteries and potentially terrifying encounters. The hunt was now far from over. It had, in fact, just begun. Lily ran a finger along the screen, tracing the fragmented sentences of the Wanderer's final posts. The erratic nature of the writing was striking, a stark contrast to the initially coherent, albeit unsettling, opening entries. The shift was gradual, a slow unraveling mirroring a descent into madness. Early posts meticulously documented the escalating sense of dread, the unnatural sounds, and the disturbing visual distortions. As the posts progressed, however, punctuation vanished, replaced by frantic, breathless paragraphs that spilled over into each other, a chaotic torrent of fear and confusion. "Look at this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She pointed to a seemingly innocuous phrase buried within a particularly chaotic entry, the whispering, not of trees, but of names, names I know, names I shouldn't. David leaned closer, his heart hammering against his ribs. Names they knew? The thought sent a fresh wave of unease washing over him. The Wanderer's experiences were mirroring their own with terrifying precision, but this detail introduced a new element, a personal connection, a horrifying intimacy with the creature's actions. Was the creature targeting specific individuals? Was it using their memories, their relationships, as weapons? Tom, still pale and shaken from the previous night's events, ran a hand through his hair. Maybe it's just hallucinations? A side effect of whatever that thing does. Emily shook her head. No, it's too specific. The details, the way it echoes our own experience, it's not random. There's something more here. She scanned the entries again, her gaze falling on a recurring motif, the mention of a specific type of tree, an ancient, gnarled oak, always described near the sites of the most horrifying encounters. He keeps mentioning these ancient oaks, she murmured, her finger tracing the repeated description. Always near the places where things got worse. Always near the source of the phosphorescent glow. David noticed another pattern, a series of seemingly random numbers interspersed throughout the posts. They were not consecutive, they appeared sporadically, sometimes in groups, sometimes alone, always seeming slightly out of place, woven into the frenzied prose. What about these numbers? He asked, pointing to a sequence, 7, 13, 22, 5. There was no obvious pattern, no mathematical sequence, no discernible code. Yet, their very presence felt significant, a cryptic puzzle piece in the horrifying narrative. Lily, ever the researcher, started cross-referencing the numbers with geographical coordinates, maps, anything that might connect them to a location. The initial searches yielded nothing, but the sheer persistence, the dedication of this unknown wanderer was striking. This wasn't just a panicked scribble of a terrified person. This was a deliberate attempt to communicate, to leave a trail, a message buried within the chaos. The numbers, scattered amidst the terror, felt less like random entries and more like breadcrumbs, a cryptic trail leading somewhere. They spent the next several hours poring over the blog, dissecting every sentence, every detail, every seemingly insignificant detail. The more they dug, the more unsettling the clues became. They discovered a recurring symbol, a stylized crescent moon with a single, jagged line through its center, etched into the margins of some entries. The symbol appeared random, almost like an involuntary tick, yet its repetitive presence hinted at a deeper, more sinister meaning. Could this be a signature? A mark left by the creature itself? Or was it a symbol that the wanderer was somehow compelled to create, a subconscious acknowledgement of the entity's presence? The mentions of the oaks intensified as they worked further back through the blog entries. There were repeated descriptions of their twisted branches, gnarled roots, and unsettlingly large, almost alien, growths upon their trunks. It felt as if the wanderer was being guided by these trees, lured toward them by some unseen force, their presence acting as a beacon to the lurking horror in the woods. As dawn broke, painting the sky in hues of gray and orange, they found another piece of the puzzle. Hidden within one of the wanderer's earlier, more coherent posts, was a description of a specific phrase, whispered amidst the disorienting cacophony of voices, "The watcher waits." The phrase resonated with a chilling familiarity. It recalled a fleeting sensation, a feeling of being observed, a knowing gaze from somewhere beyond their perception. The phrase chilled them to the bone. It felt as if the creature was speaking to them directly, reminding them that it was present, observing, waiting. This wasn't merely an account of a single event. It was a continuing narrative, an ongoing process of observation and, perhaps, manipulation. The implications were terrifying. The Wanderer's final post was not simply a desperate plea for help, but possibly a deliberate act, a cryptic communication in itself. Each detail, seemingly inconsequential alone, was now part of a larger, more terrifying tapestry. The numbers, the symbol, the repeated mentions of the ancient oaks, the phrase "the watcher waits," they were not random, they were clues, breadcrumbs left in a trail of terror. The creature hadn't simply preyed upon the wanderer, it had used him, manipulated him, making him a tool, a vessel to communicate to the next victims. They had been warned. The wanderer's story wasn't over, his suffering was a prelude to their own, a terrifying prophecy etched in digital ink, and now they were the next ones being observed, being hunted. The question lingered, what did the creature want? Was it simply a predator, feeding on fear and terror? Or was there a larger, more sinister purpose? The discovery of the Wanderer's blog had transformed their ordeal from a personal nightmare into a chilling investigation, a desperate search for answers before they became the next victims in a pattern of escalating horror. The hunt had begun. The watcher waits. And they were now being watched. The night ended, but the horror didn't. The feeling of being observed remained, a cold, unsettling presence that seeped into their very bones. Their shared ordeal had now morphed into a desperate race against time, a terrifying quest to decipher the cryptic clues left behind by the Wanderer before they, too, met a similar fate. The line between observer and observed had blurred, and the terrifying game of cat and mouse had begun. The woods were no longer just a place, they were a hunting ground, and they were the prey. The last post wasn't just a warning, it was an invitation to join the dance of fear, a silent beckoning from the edge of oblivion. The weight of this terrifying reality was upon them, and the silent threat of the Watcher waits hung heavy in the air. Their struggle for survival had only just begun. The rhythmic tap-tap-tap of Lily's fingers on the keyboard filled the silence, punctuated only by the occasional gasp or muttered exclamation from the others. The Wanderer's blog, a digital tomb of escalating terror, had become their obsession, their shared nightmare. Each new entry, each fragmented sentence, peeled back another layer of the horrifying reality, drawing them further into its chilling embrace. The initial coherent entries, detailing the unsettling occurrences in the woods, had given way to frantic scribbles, a chaotic jumble of words that mirrored the blogger's descent into madness. Now, they were piecing together the last fragments, the final desperate cries before silence. The repetitive mention of the ancient oaks, those gnarled sentinels of the woods, intensified the growing dread. Each description felt more visceral, more disturbing than the last. No longer simply trees, they became symbols of the encroaching darkness, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers, their twisted roots drawing the wanderer, and perhaps them, towards some terrible fate. Emily, her face pale and drawn, pointed to a passage where the wanderer described a feeling of being watched, of eyes hidden in the shadows of the twisted boughs, eyes that seemed to penetrate the very fabric of his being. The sensation was described with a chilling accuracy that mirrored their own unease, the constant feeling of being observed, the subtle shift in the shadows, the unnerving silence that preceded the unsettling occurrences. David, tracing the numbers scattered throughout the posts, found a new sequence, 17, 29, 41, 53. Again, no obvious mathematical pattern emerged, yet the numbers themselves felt significant, imbued with a sinister purpose. Lily, meanwhile, was attempting to link these numbers to geographical locations, but the coordinates, if they existed, remained elusive. The sheer volume of data was overwhelming, a tapestry of fear and paranoia woven into a chilling digital narrative. The pattern was maddening. They could feel the blogger's panic radiating from the screen. The recurring symbol, the crescent moon bisected by a jagged line, continued to haunt them. It appeared in the margins, etched into the digital text as if indelibly imprinted on the very soul of the wanderer. Was it a mark of the creature, a brand of its dominion? Or was it a subconscious imprint, a symbol of the horrific trauma the wanderer endured, a visual echo of the terror that had consumed him? Tom, still shaken from the night before, suggested it might be a delusion, a manifestation of the wanderer's own internal struggle. But the consistent, almost compulsive repetition of the symbol challenged his theory. It felt too deliberate, too intentional to be mere hallucination. The meticulous nature of the entries, even in their chaotic final stages, betrayed a level of controlled madness, a level of intent that was chilling to consider. The intensity of the narrative escalated with each entry, each sentence conveying a deeper sense of desperation, a greater degree of horror. The posts became shorter, more fragmented, the words themselves losing their cohesion, tumbling over each other like the disordered thoughts of a broken mind. The descriptions of the sounds were particularly disturbing, a symphony of whispers, rustling leaves, and a low, guttural growl that echoed in the spaces between the sentences, a sound that seemed to crawl under the skin and burrow into the very core of their being. They could almost hear it now, an almost subliminal undercurrent that vibrated with a palpable sense of threat. The sense of urgency was suffocating, mirrored by their own frantic attempts to decipher the clues. The final entries were almost unintelligible, a torrent of frantic words that seemed to express a final, desperate struggle against an overwhelming horror. The wanderer's perception warped, his sentences fragmented, his words blurring together into a stream of incoherent fear, his very sentences becoming a form of artistic expression of the encroaching terror. He spoke of a presence, a thing that coiled and pulsed in the shadows, feeding on his fear, his despair. He spoke of voices, myriad whispers that swirled around him, pulling him into the darkness, filling his mind with a relentless chorus of terror. Each word seemed to drip with the cold sweat of fear. Within the final, chaotic entry, Lily found a seemingly random sequence of letters, A, L, T, A, R. The word, when pieced together, sent another cold shiver down their spines. An altar? In the woods? To what entity could this altar belong? The significance of the word hung in the air, an unspoken question that deepened their dread. They were no longer just interpreting a blog, they were uncovering the details of a terrifying ritual, a macabre ceremony. The growing sense of dread wasn't confined to the blog itself, it permeated their entire existence. The seemingly mundane aspects of their lives had taken on a sinister undertone. Shadows stretched and contorted, sounds became distorted and amplified, silence itself felt heavy with anticipation, pregnant with the promise of unseen horrors. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of adrenaline through their bodies. The woods, once a place of peace and tranquility, had become a symbol of impending doom, a tangible manifestation of their deepening fear. The feeling of being watched, of being hunted, was no longer a figment of their imagination. As they continued to unravel the mystery, they found additional clues. There were descriptions of phosphorescent fungi growing on the oak trees, their ethereal glow illuminating the nocturnal scenes and further intensifying the unsettling beauty of the forest. The glow felt malevolent, the light unnatural and sinister, casting long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed in the peripheral vision. These fleeting moments intensified their feelings of unease. They were losing their grip on reality, their perceptions blurred. The repetitive nature of the clues, the constant echoing of certain symbols and phrases, only served to heighten their anxiety. It was as if the wanderer, even in his final moments of terror, was attempting to communicate something vital, a final desperate plea for help or a final, chilling warning. The fragmented narrative was a reflection of a tormented mind, but also, perhaps, a coded message to those who would follow. They were not simply reading a horror story, they were living one. The daylight couldn't penetrate the growing horror they found in the wanderer's final post. It was as if the darkness of the woods had bled into their own reality, coloring their perceptions, intensifying their fear, and blurring the lines between fantasy and reality. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights, seemed to be a sinister omen, a prelude to something far more terrible. They felt as if they were trapped in a terrifying game of cat and mouse, the hunters becoming the hunted, the prey consumed by the very thing that was hunting it. The growing paranoia began to affect their interactions. Every glance, every whispered word felt charged with an unspoken fear, a subtle awareness of the unseen presence that stalked them. The quiet moments were the most unnerving, filled with a palpable tension, a heavy silence broken only by the frantic beating of their own hearts. Their minds were in a perpetual state of hypervigilance, each sense heightened, each sound amplified, creating a constant state of nervous anticipation. Sleep became a luxury they could ill afford, the darkness promised nightmares far more real than any dream. And as the night drew to a close, as the first rays of dawn crept through the window, they still hadn't solved the puzzle, only deepened their understanding of the horrifying reality surrounding the wanderer's last post. The game was afoot, and they were the next pawns in this macabre game of terror. The woods awaited, and the watcher waits. The growing dread was no longer just a feeling, it was a tangible presence, a suffocating weight that pressed down on them, a chilling premonition of the horrors yet to come. Their race against time had begun, a desperate struggle for survival in a world where the line between reality and nightmare had blurred beyond recognition. The last post was not just a warning, it was a blood-curdling invitation to a terrifying game of survival. And they were all players now. The final entries were a chaotic symphony of fear, a fractured mirror reflecting a mind unraveling. Gone were the meticulously crafted sentences, replaced by a torrent of disjointed phrases, single words screaming from the digital page. Clawing, shadows, whispering, altar, they watch. The words tumbled over each other, a desperate attempt to articulate the unspeakable horror that had consumed him. The once clear descriptions of the woods now devolved into a nightmarish collage of distorted images and sounds. The ancient oaks, previously described with a chilling precision, became monstrous shapes, their branches writhing like grasping claws, their roots twisted into grotesque, sentient forms. The recurring symbol, the crescent moon bisected by a jagged line, appeared with even greater frequency, almost as if the wanderer was desperately trying to imprint it onto reality, to make it a tangible part of his world. It wasn't just a symbol anymore, it was a brand, a mark of possession, burned into the fabric of his perception. The very act of repeating it seemed to amplify his terror, a desperate ritual and a last-ditch attempt to ward off the unseen horror that hunted him. The descriptions of sound became even more disturbing, morphing from the rustling of leaves and whispering voices into a cacophony of terrifying noises. A low, guttural growl, once a subtle undercurrent, now dominated the narrative, a constant, visceral threat that vibrated through the screen and into their very bones. They could almost feel the vibrations in their teeth, a primal fear resonating deep within their marrow. There were other sounds too, high-pitched screeches that pierced the ears, the scraping of claws on bark, and the wet, sickening slurp of something unseen. The sounds were not just described, they were felt. The wanderer's perception of time seemed to distort. Moments stretched into agonizing eternities, while vast expanses of time collapsed into fleeting, disorienting glimpses. He spoke of days that bled into nights, of a relentless twilight where the sun never truly rose, casting the world in a perpetual, unnerving gloom. The very structure of his reality crumbled, mirroring the disintegration of his mind. Within the chaotic stream of consciousness, fragments of coherent thought occasionally surfaced, fleeting glimpses into the horror that had consumed him. He wrote of a presence, a being that pulsed with a malevolent energy, feeding on his fear, growing stronger with each desperate cry. He referred to it not as a thing, but as a presence, a suffocating weight that pressed down on him, stealing his breath, squeezing the life from his very soul. He described it as something that lived in the shadows, something that moved and shifted in the darkness, something that was always there, always watching, always waiting. It was a constant threat, a chilling reminder of his helplessness. Its form remained undefined, obscured by the darkness, but its essence was palpable, a malevolent force that seeped into every sentence, every frantic word. He spoke of voices, myriad whispers that swarmed around him, a constant chorus of mocking laughter and chilling threats. The voices whispered promises of oblivion, enticing him towards the darkness, luring him into a final, terrifying embrace. They weaved their insidious way into his consciousness, weaving tales of despair and hopelessness. He seemed to struggle against them, attempting to silence the infernal choir, but the voices only grew louder, more insistent, driving him further into madness. The final post ended abruptly, the last words a jumble of incomprehensible sounds and symbols. The screen seemed to pulsate with the lingering energy of the wanderer's fear, the silent screams radiating from the digital page. The blank space following his last post felt heavier than any words could express. The silence was not peaceful, it was a chilling vacuum, a gaping maw hinting at the profound horror that had consumed him. Lily, her eyes red-rimmed and filled with a haunting weariness, leaned back, her fingers trembling. "He's gone," she whispered, the words hanging in the air like smoke. David, his face pale and strained, nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the screen. The numbers, the symbols, the fragmented sentences, they were all pieces of a terrible puzzle, fragments of a shattered reality. Tom, ever the pragmatist, tried to find some rational explanation, some way to dismiss the overwhelming terror that had seeped into their bones. But even he found himself struggling to maintain his composure, the weight of the wanderer's descent pressing down on him. The sheer intensity of the experience had left its mark, a chilling reminder of their own vulnerability. Emily, the most emotionally sensitive of the group, looked distraught. The unsettling images had burned themselves into her mind, creating a disturbing tableau that haunted her waking moments and promised terrifying nights. She could almost feel the chilling presence of the entity, the invisible horror that had driven the wanderer to madness, the unspeakable terror that threatened to engulf them. Days turned into nights, and the group remained glued to their screens, poring over the wanderer's blog, searching for answers in the labyrinthine chaos of his final posts. They attempted to decipher the fragmented phrases, to interpret the symbolic imagery, to extract any coherent message from the torrent of fear. They felt the pressure building, a growing dread of their own proximity to the horror. They sought patterns in the randomness, tried to make sense of the nonsensical, but the only conclusion they could reach was the overwhelming sense of dread. The wanderer's madness had become their own, their fear mirrored his, their desperation matched his own. They were trapped in a macabre cycle, drawn into the vortex of fear and paranoia. The line between observer and participant blurred, their reality twisting and contorting into a twisted reflection of the horror they were witnessing. They found other strange occurrences, unexplained events that mirrored the events described in the blog. They started noticing the symbols, the crescent moon bisected by a jagged line, appearing in unexpected places. A crack in the pavement, a shadow cast by a tree, a stain on a wall, the symbol seemed to taunt them, a sinister reminder of the encroaching horror. Their sanity frayed under the strain. Sleep became a refuge from the terrifying reality of their waking moments, yet sleep also became a source of torment, delivering nightmares far more real than any dream. Their dreams were filled with the shadows, the whispers, the chilling growl of the entity, and the terrifying vision of the wanderer's descent into madness. The line between waking reality and nightmarish hallucination began to blur. The fear was no longer confined to their investigation, it permeated every aspect of their lives. The mundane world became a source of terror, each shadow a potential hiding place for the horror. The sounds they heard were amplified, distorted by their own fear. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of a floorboard, was a potential omen. Their senses were heightened, always on alert, constantly searching for signs of danger. The group's dynamics shifted. The shared experience of terror created a bond, but also a sense of paranoia. Every glance, every word, was interpreted with suspicion, the unspoken fear hanging heavy in the air. Their once strong camaraderie crumbled under the weight of their shared fear, their interactions strained and punctuated by moments of tense silence. The once vibrant energy of their group was now replaced by a palpable dread, a feeling that every moment could be their last. They were not just solving a mystery, they were trapped in a horrifying game, a desperate fight for survival against an unseen enemy. The woods, the ancient oaks, the crescent moon, these were not just symbolic elements of a blog, they were tangible reminders of their vulnerability. The wanderer's descent into madness was a chilling prophecy, a warning of the horrors that awaited them. The last post wasn't just a digital document, it was an invitation, a blood-curdling summons to a horrifying game of survival. And they, unwitting participants, were already playing. The final entry, a single, stark image, shattered the fragile hope that had clung to them like a lifeline. It wasn't a jumble of words, or a frantic cry for help, but a photograph. A grainy, poorly lit image, but clear enough to send a fresh wave of icy dread washing over them. It depicted the crescent moon, bisected by that same jagged line, hanging low in the sky over a clearing in the woods. The trees were twisted, grotesque parodies of nature, their branches clawing at the inky blackness. But it wasn't the familiar horror of the wanderer's descriptions that shocked them, it was what stood beneath the moon. A figure. Tall, gaunt, impossibly thin, its limbs elongated and unnatural. Its skin seemed to be stretched taut over bone, its features obscured by shadows, yet somehow familiar. The figure wore a long, dark robe, the fabric clinging to its skeletal frame like a shroud. Its head was bowed, almost reverently, as if paying homage to the crescent moon. But the most chilling detail was its hands. They were clasped together, and within those clasped hands, a single object rested, a silver locket. A locket identical to the one Lily had shown them earlier, the one she'd found in the Wanderer's apartment. The locket that held a tiny, faded photograph of the Wanderer himself, as a child. Silence descended upon the group, a heavy, suffocating silence that amplified the chilling implications of the image. The revelation hit them with the force of a physical blow. The Wanderer wasn't just a victim, he was a participant. He wasn't merely documenting his descent into madness, he was enacting a ritual, a horrifying self-sacrifice. The symbols, the sounds, the distorted images, they weren't just hallucinations, they were components of a ritualistic process, a descent into something far older and more sinister than they could have imagined. Tom, his face ashen, broke the silence. It's him, he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. That's him, under the moon. He's the one who was watching him. The implication hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The entity, the presence that had haunted the Wanderer's final posts, wasn't a separate being at all. It was a manifestation of his own subconscious, a darker self brought to life through some terrible, occult ritual. The Wanderer hadn't been driven mad by an external force, he had willingly surrendered himself to it, transforming into the very thing he feared. Emily, her eyes wide with horror, trembled. But, the locket, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. It's the same. The one with his picture. How? Lily, her own face pale and drawn, stared at the image, her fingers tracing the outline of the crescent moon on her own worn locket, the twin of the one held in the figure's skeletal hands. A slow, horrifying realization dawned on her face. She looked up, her eyes meeting David's, and a silent understanding passed between them. The Wanderer's blog wasn't a warning, it was a confession, a desperate plea for help that was misconstrued due to the disorienting nature of his experience. His descent into madness wasn't random, it was orchestrated, guided by a dark force that stemmed from within, from a deep-seated, buried trauma that the locket held the key to. The ritual had been triggered by something, some unknown event that caused the slumbering horror within to awaken and take control. The unsettling implications of this revelation were overwhelming. The entity wasn't some lurking horror, it was the Wanderer himself, transformed, twisted into a grotesque parody of humanity. The woods were not merely a setting, they were a stage for a horrifying ritual, a place where the line between reality and nightmare blurred and collapsed. The symbols, once mere markers of his descent, now took on a sinister significance, revealing a dark pattern of self-destruction orchestrated by a hidden part of himself. The group fell into a stunned silence, the weight of the revelation crushing them. They had spent weeks trying to unravel the mystery, fearing an external force, only to discover that the true horror resided within. The Wanderer's fear wasn't just a reflection of his reality, it was a premonition of his transformation, a chilling prophecy he inadvertently fulfilled. Days blurred into weeks as they delved deeper into the mystery, piecing together the fragmented clues scattered within the Wanderer's chilling tale. They discovered that the locket was not just a family heirloom, it was a powerful artifact, a conduit for channeling a malevolent energy, a gateway to the darkest recesses of the human psyche. The crescent moon bisected by a jagged line was not merely a symbol, it was a sigil, a mark of possession, a summoning sign for a primal darkness that dwelled within the Wanderer. Their investigation uncovered a hidden history, a family legacy of occult practices and unspeakable rituals passed down through generations. The Wanderer wasn't just a victim of a supernatural entity, he was a willing participant, unknowingly bound to an ancient curse that manifested as this chilling, shadowy figure. The blog wasn't just a diary of his descent into madness, it was a cry for help, a desperate attempt to break the cycle of horror that bound his family for centuries. The final image, they realized, wasn't just a picture of the Wanderer's transformation, it was a snapshot of the culmination of the ritual, the moment he fully embraced the darkness, becoming the monstrous figure he feared. It was a horrifying, self-inflicted damnation, a self-fulfilling prophecy orchestrated by generations of occult practices, hidden within the seemingly innocuous family locket. The chilling revelation left them with a profound sense of unease, a lingering feeling that the horror wasn't contained within the confines of the blog, that it extended far beyond the screen, into their own lives. The symbols, the sounds, the dread, they were no longer just part of a horrifying tale, they were a tangible threat, a constant reminder of their own vulnerability, a chilling premonition of what might lie ahead. The ambiguity of the ending intensified the horror. The Wanderer's fate remained unclear, leaving a chilling void in its wake. Was he truly lost to the darkness? Had the ritual completely consumed him, leaving nothing but the monstrous figure under the moon? Or was there still a fragment of the original Wanderer trapped within, fighting against the shadows that threatened to engulf him? The unanswered questions lingered, gnawing at their minds, leaving a lingering sense of unease, a chilling reminder that the true horror lies not in the unknown, but in the horrifying possibilities of what lies hidden within the human soul. The group, now forever changed by the chilling tale, found themselves caught in a macabre cycle, haunted by the chilling echoes of the Wanderer's last post, a haunting testament to the power of self-destruction and the terrifying consequences of unlocking the darkest corners of the human psyche. They were no longer just investigators, they were unwitting participants in a timeless, horrifying ritual, forever bound to the chilling legacy of the Wanderer and the horrifying truth that lurked within the seemingly innocuous silver locket. The silence that followed the revelation wasn't a sense of resolution, it was the unsettling calm before a storm of unimaginable horror. Story 3, Their Vanishing of Willow Creek nestled in a valley, cradled by rolling hills that blushed crimson and gold in the autumn sun. The air hummed with the lazy drone of cicadas, a soundtrack to a life seemingly untouched by the harsh realities of the outside world. It was the kind of place where porch swings creaked gently, where the scent of freshly baked bread mingled with the crisp autumn air, and where the biggest drama involved a misplaced garden gnome. At least, that's what Sarah initially believed. Sarah herself was a study in contrasts to the sleepy town. Her dark hair, usually pulled back in a practical ponytail, framed a face etched with a quiet weariness that belied her youthful features. The city grime that had clung to her like a second skin in New York had finally begun to fade, replaced by the soft, earthy tones of rural life. But the shadows in her eyes, those remained. She'd come to Willow Creek seeking solace, a haven from the ghosts that haunted her past. Ironically, it seemed she'd found a new set of specters, only these ones wore the faces of the living. Her move to Willow Creek had been impulsive, a desperate attempt to outrun the memories that clawed at her sleep. The peace she'd sought, however, proved elusive. The silence of the countryside, initially soothing, had begun to feel heavy, oppressive. It was the kind of silence that whispered secrets, a silence that crackled with an unspoken energy. And it all started with the whispers about Emily Carter. Emily Carter had vanished from Willow Creek 30 years ago. A little girl with pigtails and bright, curious eyes, she had disappeared as if swallowed by the earth itself. The official police report had declared it a runaway case, a simple explanation for a complex mystery. Yet, the town harbored a different narrative, one woven from fragmented memories and hushed conversations held in darkened kitchens. A narrative that spoke of a child lost, not to youthful rebellion, but to something far more sinister. Sarah first heard the whispers during her first week in town. She was at the general store, purchasing groceries, when she overheard a group of elderly women gossiping near the counter. Their voices were low, conspiratorial, and their words tumbled around Sarah like dried leaves caught in a sudden gust of wind. They spoke of Emily, of a night shrouded in mist, of strange lights flickering in the distant woods, and of a silence that descended upon Willow Creek after Emily's disappearance, a silence that seemed to linger still. Intrigued, and perhaps driven by a morbid curiosity, Sarah started her own investigation. She visited the local library, poring over yellowed newspaper clippings and dusty archives. The official accounts were sparse, offering little beyond the basic facts of Emily's disappearance. But the gaps in those official reports were filled by a wealth of anecdotal evidence, unease that preceded the vanishing, a persistent feeling of being watched, even an almost palpable chill in the air on the night she was last seen. These whispers were a chorus of unease, a collective memory of a darkness that had settled over the town and never truly lifted. The more Sarah delved into the mystery, the more the idyllic facade of Willow Creek began to crumble. The townsfolk were initially reticent to speak about the past, their eyes darting nervously as they brushed off her questions. But Sarah was persistent, and as days turned into weeks, she gradually chipped away at their guardedness. She shared coffee and homemade pies with elderly residents, listening patiently as they recounted their memories, fragments of a narrative slowly coming together like pieces of a shattered puzzle. Old Mrs. Gable, her hands gnarled with age, spoke of a recurring nightmare she'd had since Emily's disappearance, a nightmare of a shadowy figure lurking in the woods, its eyes burning with an unnatural light. Mr. Henderson, the town's quiet librarian, shared a faded photograph of Emily, taken just days before her disappearance, a photograph that seemed to hold an unsettling stillness, as if a ghost had been captured along with the living child. These were not just isolated incidents, they were threads of a much larger tapestry, all pointing to a darkness that lurked just beneath the surface of Willow Creek's placid exterior. One chilly afternoon, Sarah discovered an old, abandoned house on the outskirts of town. The paint peeled from its weathered wooden siding like sunburnt skin, and the windows were dark, empty sockets staring out into the world. A sense of foreboding clung to the air around it, a feeling of forgotten sorrow and repressed fear. Driven by an instinct she couldn't quite explain, Sarah ventured inside. The house groaned under the weight of years, each creak and groan a mournful sigh. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the gloom, revealing a scene of decay and neglect. In the basement, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, Sarah found a hidden cellar. The air in the cellar was thick, heavy with the smell of damp earth and something else, something indefinably ancient and unsettling. It smelled of fear, of something long dead yet somehow still present. The cellar was sparsely furnished, containing nothing but a crude wooden table and a single chair. But on the table, Sarah found a collection of artifacts, tarnished silver trinkets, intricately carved wooden figures, and a leather-bound journal whose pages were filled with cryptic symbols and unsettling writings. The script was unfamiliar, but the imagery was unmistakable, symbols associated with ancient pagan rituals, drawings of twisted, nightmarish creatures, and disturbing depictions of human sacrifice. The journal spoke of a dark pact, of a power drawn from the depths of the earth, a power that demanded a terrible price. As Sarah examined the journal, a cold draft snaked through the cellar, raising the hairs on the back of her neck. The air grew heavy, oppressive. She felt a presence, something unseen yet keenly felt, watching her, studying her, assessing her. The feeling was not merely fear, it was something far more primal, a sense of absolute dread that went to the very core of her being. She fled the cellar, leaving the disturbing artifacts and the cryptic journal behind. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she had only scratched the surface of Willow Creek's dark secret. Returning to her own small cottage that evening, Sarah sat by the window, watching the sun sink below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The idyllic beauty of Willow Creek, once a source of comfort, now felt like a deceptive mask. The town's tranquility was nothing more than a carefully constructed facade, masking a horrifying truth. Underneath the quaint charm, a profound darkness resided, feeding on the town's unsuspecting inhabitants. Willow Creek was not the sanctuary she had hoped for. It was a prison, subtly concealing a terrifying secret, one that had claimed at least one innocent child and threatened many more. The whispers in the woods, the reluctance of the townsfolk, the ancient symbols in the cellar, it was all connected. Emily's disappearance wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom, a terrible manifestation of something far darker, something ancient and malevolent. And now, Sarah had become entangled in that darkness, a pawn in a game she didn't understand but could no longer escape. The peace she'd sought in Willow Creek had shattered, leaving in its place a chilling certainty. Willow Creek was not the quiet, innocent town it seemed to be. It was a place where shadows danced in the daylight, a place where the past clung to the present with a suffocating grip, and a place where the darkness had found a new victim. The next morning, Sarah packed her belongings, leaving Willow Creek behind, forever marked by the knowledge of its sinister secret, its horrifying truth, a truth she could no longer bear to witness. The idyllic facade had cracked, and the darkness beneath had begun to leak, threatening to consume her entirely. But she carried with her a seed of determination. She might have left Willow Creek, but the whispers would follow, fueling her resolve to understand, to expose, and maybe, just maybe, to find a way to end the nightmare once and for all. The next day dawned gray and sullen, mirroring the unease that had settled deep within Sarah's bones. The whispers, once faint murmurs in the periphery, had intensified, a chorus of unease that echoed in the rustling leaves and the sighing wind. She felt a compulsion, a morbid curiosity that propelled her towards the heart of the mystery, into the dark embrace of the woods surrounding Willow Creek. Armed with nothing but a flashlight, a compass, and a growing sense of dread, Sarah entered the woods. The trees, their branches gnarled and twisted like skeletal fingers, seemed to reach out, clawing at her as she ventured deeper into their shadowed depths. The sunlight, weak and diffused, struggled to penetrate the dense canopy, leaving the forest floor in perpetual twilight. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, a fragrance that was somehow both earthy and unnervingly sweet. The silence of the woods was not the peaceful hush she'd experienced before. It was a pregnant silence, heavy with unspoken secrets, a silence that vibrated with an unsettling energy. The only sounds were the occasional snap of a twig under her boots, the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, and a low, almost imperceptible humming that seemed to emanate from the very heart of the forest. As she walked deeper, Sarah began to notice strange symbols carved into the ancient trees. They were not the familiar markings of nature. These were deliberate, precise, and unsettling. The symbols resembled those she had seen in the cellar, cryptic and disturbing, etched deep into the bark, almost as if they had been there for centuries. Some were crude, almost childlike in their simplicity, while others were complex and intricate, their meaning lost to time. They were undeniably ancient, hinting at rituals and beliefs long forgotten. The animals of the woods behaved strangely. Birds that usually sang merrily were silent, their absence creating an even more disturbing void. Squirrels, normally busy and chattering, remained motionless, their eyes fixed on Sarah with an unnerving intensity. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, as if anticipating something. The air itself felt charged, pregnant with an unspoken dread. Twice, she heard sounds that defied explanation, a low, guttural growl that seemed to come from deep within the earth, and a high-pitched wail that echoed through the trees, haunting and mournful, like the cry of a lost soul. These sounds weren't the familiar noises of the forest, they were something else entirely, otherworldly, sinister. They sent shivers down her spine that had nothing to do with the chill October air. Sarah stumbled upon a clearing. In the center stood a large, ancient oak, its branches reaching towards the sky like supplicating arms. At the base of the tree, she discovered a circle of stones, arranged in a pattern that echoed the symbols she had seen etched into the trees. The stones were smooth and worn, as if they had been touched by countless hands over the years. A chilling feeling washed over Sarah. This was no ordinary clearing. This was a place of power, a nexus of some ancient, forgotten energy. The air here was especially thick, heavy with a sense of unease that was almost palpable. She felt a presence, a lurking entity, watching her from the shadows, its gaze cold and relentless. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Fear, raw and primal, threatened to overwhelm her, but Sarah fought it down. She had come too far to turn back now. She had to understand what was happening in Willow Creek. She had to know what lurked in the shadows of the woods. As she examined the stones, a flicker of movement caught her eye. From the edge of the clearing, a pair of eyes, luminous and unsettling, watched her. They glowed with an unnatural light, burning with an intensity that made Sarah's heart pound in her chest. Slowly, a creature emerged from the shadows, a being that defied description, a creature of nightmare, its form shifting and indistinct, its features both reptilian and human. It moved with an unnatural grace, gliding through the undergrowth, its movements silent and deliberate. Terror threatened to paralyze Sarah, but she stood her ground, her fear momentarily forgotten in the face of this horrifying apparition. She raised her flashlight, aiming its beam at the creature, but the light seemed to have no effect. The being continued to advance, its eyes never leaving hers, its presence a cold wave of dread that seemed to seep into her very soul. For what seemed like an eternity, Sarah and the creature stood face to face, locked in a silent confrontation. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it vanished, melting back into the shadows as if it had never existed. The only evidence of its presence was the lingering chill in the air and the pounding of Sarah's heart in her chest. Shaken but undeterred, Sarah left the clearing, her mind racing, trying to make sense of what she had witnessed. The creatures she encountered, the symbols she discovered, and the unnerving sounds she had heard all pointed to a darker reality, a truth that lay hidden beneath the idyllic facade of Willow Creek. This wasn't just a missing person case, it was something far greater, something ancient and deeply sinister. As she made her way back to town, the twilight deepened, the woods growing darker, more menacing with each passing moment. The whispers intensified, a constant, unsettling murmur that seemed to seep into her very being. The woods felt alive, not with the familiar sounds of nature, but with the presence of something ancient, something malevolent, something that was watching her, waiting. She knew that her investigation had only just begun. She had merely scratched the surface of the darkness that lurked beneath Willow Creek. And the darkness was watching her, waiting for its opportunity. The silence of the forest was no longer peaceful, it was a threat, a promise of something far more sinister to come. The whispers followed her, a constant, chilling reminder of the terrifying truth hidden within Willow Creek's seemingly tranquil embrace. And she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her life would never be the same again. The next morning, Sarah returned to Willow Creek, armed with a battered map of the town dating back to the 1920s and a renewed determination. The initial reticence she'd encountered the previous day had solidified into a wall of silence. The townsfolk, a tight-knit community bound by generations of shared history, seemed to have erected an invisible barrier, their eyes darting away whenever she attempted to broach the subject of the disappearances. Their smiles were strained, their conversations clipped, their evasiveness a tangible presence in the crisp autumn air. She started with Mrs. Gable, owner of the only general store in town. Mrs. Gable, a woman whose age was as withered as the porch swing on her front porch, initially offered only a tight-lipped nod and a plate of suspiciously stale cookies. But Sarah's persistence, a slow, insistent drip of questions, finally eroded the defenses. The cookies remained untouched. "There have been things," Mrs. Gable whispered, her voice raspy with age and a hint of something else, something akin to fear. "Things that happen in these woods, things people don't talk about." She glanced nervously at the forest bordering her property, its dark silhouette looming ominously against the pale sky. "It's best left forgotten, dearie. Some things are better left undisturbed." Sarah pressed on, her curiosity overriding her apprehension. She showed Mrs. Gable the old photographs she'd acquired from the local historical society, grainy images of smiling families, of children playing in the very woods where she'd encountered the unsettling creature. The images, once brimming with warmth, now felt strangely unsettling, each face bearing a subtle undercurrent of something off. A nameless, inexplicable fear. A premonition of the tragedies to come. "That's the Miller family," Mrs. Gable rasped, pointing at one photograph. 3 children, all vanished without a trace within a year of each other. They just disappeared. Gone. Like the wind. No bodies, no clues, just empty space. She shivered, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. This confirmed Sarah's suspicions. The disappearances weren't isolated incidents. There was a pattern, a dark undercurrent running through the seemingly quiet history of Willow Creek. Mrs. Gable's reluctance to share more was understandable. This was not merely a missing person case, it was a long-standing taboo, a community secret guarded with the fervor of a sacred trust, a fear passed down through generations. Next, Sarah visited the town hall, hoping to access old police reports and news clippings. The town clerk, a young man with a weary look far beyond his years, was initially hesitant. But Sarah's determination, coupled with a carefully crafted story about a research project for a university, finally won him over. He provided Sarah with access to a dusty archive room, a place where time seemed to stand still. The documents she unearthed were a chilling tapestry of unanswered questions. Reports of unexplained events, of strange occurrences in the woods, of whispers in the night, filled the yellowed pages. There were accounts of distorted animal cries, eerie lights in the sky, and mysterious symbols carved into trees, symbols strikingly similar to those Sarah had encountered in the woods. Many reports had been dismissed as folklore, or the product of overactive imaginations. Others were simply marked unsolved and tucked away, forgotten. One report particularly stood out. It detailed the disappearance of a young woman named Eliza Blackwood in 1898. Eliza, according to the report, had been last seen near the same ancient oak tree where Sarah had encountered the creature. The report included a sketch, a crude rendering of a being with reptilian eyes and elongated limbs, a drawing that chilled Sarah to the bone. It was strikingly similar to the creature she had faced in the clearing. The report concluded with the note case closed. No further investigation necessary. As Sarah delved deeper into the archives, a horrifying pattern emerged. The disappearances, she discovered, weren't random. They followed a cyclical pattern, occurring roughly every 30 years. The last significant cluster of disappearances happened around 1960. And now, 60 years later, Willow Creek was again gripped by fear. The old newspapers, brittle with age, offered a glimpse into the lives of those who had vanished. Their photographs, like those she'd seen at Mrs. Gable's, revealed a subtle undercurrent of dread behind their smiles. There was an unspoken fear in their eyes, a silent acknowledgement of something lurking just beyond their vision. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah's investigation grew increasingly unsettling. She found old diaries detailing unsettling dreams and nightmares, all linked to the woods surrounding Willow Creek. She discovered a hidden chamber beneath the town's old church, containing a collection of strange artifacts, including bone carvings, ritualistic tools, and a book filled with incomprehensible symbols, a book that echoed the markings she'd found on the trees. This hidden chamber, she surmised, was a shrine, a place where ancient rituals had been performed. The townsfolk, initially reluctant, now watched Sarah with a mixture of fear and fascination. Some tried to warn her, to dissuade her from continuing her investigation. Others seemed to be subtly encouraging her, their eyes filled with a strange mixture of apprehension and hope. They seemed to know more than they let on, their silence a deliberate choice, a silent pact to protect their town from something far more ancient and more terrible than anything she could have imagined. Each new discovery added another piece to the horrifying puzzle. The disappearances, the symbols, the ancient rituals, the creature in the woods, it all pointed towards a dark history, a history that was far more sinister and far more ancient than Sarah had initially imagined. She was no longer merely investigating a missing person case, she was unraveling a centuries-old mystery, a mystery that threatened to engulf her completely. And the chilling whispers in the night continued to intensify, a constant reminder of the lurking presence that haunted Willow Creek. The town's secrets were finally beginning to surface, but Sarah had a feeling that the full truth was far darker, far more terrifying than anything she could have ever conceived. The truth, she sensed, was waiting for her, lurking in the shadows, biding its time. And it was coming. The old Victorian house stood on the edge of Willow Creek, its paint peeling like sunburnt skin, its windows like vacant eyes staring out at the encroaching forest. Locals called it the Blackwood House, a name whispered with a mixture of fear and morbid curiosity. It had been abandoned for decades, a silent sentinel guarding its secrets. Sarah had found mention of it in the town archives, a fleeting reference to a family who had mysteriously vanished in the 1920s, their fate as shrouded in mystery as the house itself. Armed with a flashlight and a growing unease, Sarah approached the dilapidated structure. The front door hung precariously on its hinges, a silent invitation to enter. The air inside was thick with the smell of damp earth and decay, a chilling counterpoint to the crisp autumn air outside. Dust motes danced in the beam of her flashlight, illuminating cobwebs that hung like ghostly shrouds. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional creak of the settling house. She navigated through rooms filled with decaying furniture and layers of dust, each step echoing in the oppressive silence. The wallpaper peeled away from the walls in strips, revealing the dark wood beneath, stained with age and possibly something else, something darker. A chill, unrelated to the autumn air, crawled up her spine. This wasn't just abandonment, this was desertion, a hasty retreat from something terrifying. In the back of the house, she found a section of the floor that felt strangely loose. A gentle push revealed a trapdoor, concealed beneath a rotting rug. Her heart pounded in her chest as she knelt, her fingers tracing the rough edges of the wooden frame. This was it, she realized, the hidden cellar mentioned in the fragmented notes she'd found in the town hall archives. With a deep breath, she lifted the trapdoor. A wave of cold, damp air rushed up, carrying with it a scent that made her stomach churn, the metallic tang of blood mingled with the earthy aroma of decaying leaves and something else, something ancient and unsettling. A scent that seemed to whisper secrets of death and forgotten rites. She descended into the darkness, her flashlight cutting through the gloom. The cellar was a cramped, subterranean space, its walls damp and slick with moisture. The air hung heavy with the scent of decay and fear, a palpable presence that wrapped around her like a shroud. Here, amidst the darkness, lay the answers she sought. Scattered across the dirt floor were strange artifacts, tarnished silver chalices, bone carvings of grotesque figures, and intricately woven tapestries depicting scenes that defied comprehension. The figures in the tapestries seemed to writhe and twist, their movements somehow both terrifying and mesmerizing. Sarah felt a sickening pull towards them, an urge to understand the chilling narrative they depicted, a narrative that seemed to speak of ancient rituals and blood sacrifices. In one corner, she found a wooden chest, its lock rusted and broken. Inside, nestled amongst layers of faded velvet, lay a leather-bound book. Its pages were brittle with age, the ink faded but still legible in places. The script was unfamiliar, a language older than any she had ever encountered, yet the symbols seemed eerily familiar, echoing the markings she had seen carved into the trees and the stones in the woods. The symbols were complex, intertwined, each stroke imbued with a chilling sense of power and ancient knowledge. As she carefully turned the pages, images flashed through her mind, fleeting glimpses of rituals, sacrifices, and shadowy figures moving in the darkness. The book seemed to have a life of its own, its pages whispering secrets that echoed in the stillness of the cellar. The visions were unsettling, almost unbearable, leaving her breathless and shaking. It felt as though the book itself was trying to communicate with her, to share the terrifying burden of its knowledge. Near the book, she found a small, intricately carved wooden box. Opening it, she found a collection of dried herbs and a single, perfectly preserved human finger bone. The bone was small, clearly belonging to a child. A wave of nausea washed over her, forcing her to step back, her breath catching in her throat. The reality of the situation slammed into her. This wasn't just an ancient ritual site, it was a place where unspeakable acts had been committed. Days bled into nights as Sarah meticulously documented her findings. Each artifact, each symbol, each cryptic sentence in the ancient book pointed towards a darker side of Willow Creek's history, a history of secret societies, ancient pagan rituals, and a terrifying connection to the disappearances. The cyclical pattern, the specific symbols, the proximity of the disappearances to the Blackwood house, it all converged into a horrifying theory. Willow Creek wasn't just haunted by whispers, it was the epicenter of a long-standing occult practice, a place where the veil between worlds was thin, where ancient entities could cross over. The missing people weren't just victims of a random predator, they were sacrifices, offerings to some dark, unseen power. The creatures she had seen in the woods, the unsettling symbols, the whispers in the night, they were all manifestations of this dark energy, a constant reminder of the terrifying truth hidden beneath Willow Creek's idyllic facade. The weight of this realization settled upon Sarah like a physical burden. She felt the chilling breath of the ancient evil on her neck, the unseen eyes watching her from the shadows. She had uncovered a truth so terrible, so deeply rooted in the town's history, that she questioned if she would ever truly escape its grasp. The chilling discovery in the Blackwood house wasn't just the end of one chapter, it was the beginning of a far more terrifying ordeal. The truth, she now knew, was far more monstrous than she could have ever imagined, and it was slowly, relentlessly, closing in. The town's secrets were no longer whispering, they were screaming. And Sarah, trapped in their chilling embrace, was beginning to understand the terrible cost of uncovering the truth. The whispers had become a deafening roar, a prelude to a nightmare she couldn't escape. The weight of the discovery pressed down on Sarah, a suffocating blanket woven from dread and the chilling certainty of something ancient and malevolent. The idyllic charm of Willow Creek, previously so captivating, now felt like a deceptive veil, a thin curtain concealing a horrifying truth. The sun, sitting behind the silhouetted trees, cast long, skeletal shadows that seemed to writhe and twist, mirroring the unsettling images from the ancient book. The whispers she'd initially dismissed as folklore now echoed in her ears, a cacophony of fear and foreboding. She left the cellar, the trapdoor groaning shut behind her like a final sigh. The Blackwood house, once merely a derelict building, now felt like a tomb, a monument to unspeakable horrors. Each step she took away from it felt like an escape from a nightmare, yet the chilling presence of the ancient evil clung to her, a spectral shadow that mirrored her every movement. The woods surrounding the house seemed to watch her, the trees their silent sentinels, their branches gnarled like skeletal fingers. Back in her motel room, the mundane reality of chipped paint and flickering fluorescent lights felt jarringly out of place against the backdrop of her horrifying discovery. She meticulously organized her notes, the ancient script from the book laid out beside sketches of the artifacts. The symbols, recurring motifs of twisting serpents and stylized human sacrifices, seemed to pulse with a sinister energy, their presence subtly unsettling. She felt a strange compulsion to study them, a morbid fascination that defied logic and reason. Sleep offered no respite. Nightmares plagued her, vivid and disturbing visions of shadowy figures dancing in the moonlight, their faces obscured by darkness, their movements fluid and sinister. The cries of children echoed in her dreams, a chilling chorus of despair that clung to her even upon waking. The scent of blood and decaying leaves seemed to linger in her nostrils, a phantom reminder of the horrors she had uncovered. Days turned into a blur of research, poring over local historical records, piecing together fragments of Willow Creek's past. She discovered whispers of a secretive society, active in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, its rituals shrouded in mystery and shrouded in secrecy. Old newspaper clippings described strange disappearances, coinciding with periods of unusual lunar activity, occurrences that were conveniently dismissed as coincidences or wanderings into the unforgiving wilderness. But Sarah saw a pattern, a grim cycle of ritual sacrifice, the missing individuals, children and vulnerable adults, offerings to a malevolent entity. She revisited the town library, scouring through dusty tomes of local history. She unearthed accounts of strange occurrences, sightings of unearthly beings, whispers of an ancient power lurking beneath the surface of the town's placid exterior. The stories, initially dismissed as folklore, now took on a horrifying new significance, piecing together the terrifying puzzle of Willow Creek's dark history. The more she learned, the more she realized the extent of the evil that had festered beneath the seemingly peaceful surface of Willow Creek. The ancient book had provided her with a disturbing map, guiding her deeper into the heart of the darkness. The symbols, the artifacts, the rituals, all pointed towards a terrifying truth. Willow Creek was not merely haunted, it was possessed. The town itself seemed to exude a palpable sense of unease, a chilling atmosphere of dread that settled upon her like a shroud. The friendly smiles of the townspeople now felt strained, their eyes holding a glint of something she couldn't quite decipher: fear. Knowledge? Complicity? The warmth of community she'd initially sensed was now replaced by a creeping sense of paranoia, the unsettling feeling that she was being watched, her every move scrutinized by unseen eyes. Sarah found herself growing increasingly isolated. Her attempts to share her findings were met with skepticism, denial, and, in some cases, outright hostility. The town's collective silence felt like a conspiracy, a deliberate effort to keep the truth buried beneath layers of deceit and denial. It was as though Willow Creek itself was fighting back, defending its dark secret with a chilling resolve. The final night arrived, and the decision to leave Willow Creek was unavoidable. The culmination of her discoveries had left her shaken, profoundly altered by the horrifying revelation of the town's dark underbelly. The weight of the knowledge she carried was immense, a heavy burden she knew she'd never truly shed. As she drove away, the lights of Willow Creek receded into the distance, their glow dimming until they were swallowed by the enveloping darkness. The trees lining the road seemed to reach out, grasping tendrils of shadow, a chilling farewell from the town's malevolent guardian. Looking in the rearview mirror, she saw a flash of movement in the darkness, a fleeting glimpse of something sinister lurking among the trees. The image was gone in an instant, yet its chill persisted, etching itself into her memory. The journey home was long and arduous, each mile taking her further away from the horrors of Willow Creek, but not from the chilling memory of her experience. The ancient symbols from the book seemed etched into her mind, a haunting reminder of the evil she'd uncovered. The weight of her knowledge settled upon her shoulders, a heavy burden she would carry for the rest of her life. She knew, with chilling certainty, that the secrets of Willow Creek were far from over. The whispers, she suspected, would follow her, a constant reminder of the darkness she'd encountered in that shadowed corner of the world. The truth she'd unearthed was a chilling testament to the evil that can fester in the shadows, the horrors that can lie hidden beneath the surface of seemingly idyllic communities. The knowledge, however terrible, was hers to bear, a chilling burden she'd carry far from Willow Creek's haunted embrace. The town's secrets were not only buried beneath its idyllic facade, they were woven into its very being, an ominous thread that had become inextricably entwined with Sarah's own existence. As she drove away, the town seemed to recede into the darkness, leaving Sarah alone with the chilling echo of its unspoken truths, a forever altered individual, eternally bound to the dreadful secrets of Willow Creek. The shadow of Willow Creek would forever haunt her. Story 4, The Static on Channel 3. The hum of the motel room's refrigerator was the only sound for a long time. Sarah sat hunched over her notes, the ancient script from the Blackwood House book illuminated by the harsh glare of her laptop screen. The symbols, twisted serpents and stylized human sacrifices, felt less like ink on paper and more like a living tapestry, pulsating with a low, unsettling energy. She felt a prickling sensation at the back of her neck, the feeling of being watched, intensified by the oppressive silence of the night. She decided to take a break, the strain of deciphering the cryptic text causing a throbbing headache. Reaching for the remote, she flicked through the channels, the flickering images a welcome distraction from the disturbing symbols. Most channels offered the usual late-night infomercials and reruns, but she paused on Channel 3, a local station known for its somewhat quirky programming. An older man with a kindly face and a shock of white hair was introducing the nightly news. The anchor's voice, though comforting, was somewhat muffled, the audio slightly off. She assumed it was a poor signal, a common occurrence in the remote area. But as the anchor began to speak about the local council meeting, the screen began to flicker erratically. The audio crackled and distorted, interspersed with strange, high-pitched whistles that sent a shiver down her spine. The picture degraded rapidly, dissolving into a chaotic mess of white noise and static. Most people would have switched channels, dismissing it as a simple technical glitch. But Sarah found herself strangely captivated by the static. Something about the pattern of the noise, the way the white noise pulsed and shifted, felt wrong. It wasn't just random noise, there was a structure to it, a hidden pattern beneath the surface. She leaned closer to the screen, her eyes straining to decipher the subtle variations in the static's intensity. Then, amidst the chaotic swirl of white noise, she saw it. A fleeting image, barely perceptible, a flash of something dark and twisted, almost subliminal. It was gone in an instant, replaced by the relentless barrage of static, but the image burned itself into her memory, a distorted face, its features twisted into a grotesque parody of human emotion, surrounded by an unnatural, swirling darkness. Intrigued, Sarah rewound the recording feature on her DVR, meticulously replaying the section of static. She paused the recording frame by frame, analyzing the subtle shifts in the noise patterns, hoping to find more hidden images. The more she watched, the more convinced she became that the static wasn't random at all. It was a coded message, a visual cipher hidden in plain sight. She spent the next several hours painstakingly analyzing the static, capturing screenshots and experimenting with various image enhancement techniques. She discovered other fleeting images, distorted symbols eerily similar to those in the ancient book, glimpses of shadowy figures moving in an unnatural, jerky way, and what seemed to be a fleeting landscape, an eerily familiar landscape that looked strangely like the woods surrounding the Blackwood house. The audio, too, revealed unsettling details. As she slowed down the audio recording, she could discern fragments of whispers, barely audible murmurs that seemed to be coming directly from the static. The words were indistinct, but she could make out certain phrases like sacrifice, moonlight, and the old ways. The implication of those whispered phrases caused a cold dread to crawl up her spine. The feeling of dread intensified as she revisited the symbols she'd found in the static. They were identical to the symbols from the book, the same twisted serpents and stylized human sacrifices. This was no coincidence. The broadcast wasn't just a technical malfunction, it was a deliberate message, a sinister communication emanating from the heart of Willow Creek's malevolence. The implication sent a chill down her spine. If the static on Channel 3 was a deliberate broadcast, then someone or something in Willow Creek was actively trying to communicate, to share a message. And that message, judging by the disturbing images and whispers, was not something to be taken lightly. It was a message imbued with dread, a threat veiled in static. Days bled into nights as Sarah continued her investigation, her focus shifting from the ancient book to the mystery of the late-night broadcast. She contacted the local television station, but her inquiries were met with indifference, the station manager dismissing her concerns as the ramblings of a conspiracy theorist. He insisted that the static was merely a technical issue, a temporary disruption in the broadcast signal. But Sarah knew better. The static was too deliberate, too structured, to be merely a technical fault. She turned to other sources, reaching out to experts in signal processing and cryptology, seeking help in deciphering the hidden message within the static. They were initially skeptical, but as Sarah presented her evidence, the enhanced images, the slowed audio recordings, their skepticism began to waver. They, too, were beginning to recognize the pattern, the hidden structure beneath the chaotic surface of the static. One expert, a specialist in coded communications, suggested that the static may be a form of steganography, a method of concealing a message within another medium. The images and whispers, he hypothesized, were merely the tip of the iceberg, a carefully orchestrated diversion designed to obscure a far more sinister message. He suggested analyzing the frequency patterns within the static, looking for subtle variations that might indicate a hidden code. The work was painstaking, requiring hours of meticulous analysis, but the results were astonishing. Deep within the seemingly random patterns of the static, they discovered a hidden digital signal, a series of encoded numbers embedded within the noise. They deciphered the numbers, revealing a sequence of coordinates. The coordinates led to a location deep within the Blackwood Forest, a place Sarah had not yet explored. The discovery was both terrifying and exhilarating. It was undeniable proof that the static was not a mere technical error. It was a message, a hidden communication, leading her to a new piece of the puzzle. The implications sent shivers down her spine. This new location, this seemingly innocuous spot deep within the woods, was likely the heart of Willow Creek's sinister secret. The next morning, Sarah rented a rugged SUV, equipping herself with a high-powered flashlight, a GPS device, and all the research notes she had accumulated. The journey into the Blackwood Forest was fraught with unease. The dense foliage cast long, eerie shadows, the stillness of the woods amplifying every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig. The air felt heavy, suffocating, and the forest itself seemed to emanate a palpable sense of dread. She reached the coordinates at dusk, the fading sunlight casting long, skeletal shadows that seemed to writhe and twist before her eyes. The location was a clearing, a small, almost insignificant patch of land in the middle of the dense forest. But there was something profoundly unsettling about the place, a deep silence that felt utterly unnatural, a void in the heart of the woods. As darkness enveloped the clearing, Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. It wasn't just the cold night air, it was a deeper, more profound sense of unease, a feeling of being watched, of being surrounded by unseen eyes. The hair on the back of her neck stood on end. The air crackled with an unseen energy, a palpable sense of dread that mirrored the disturbing static on Channel 3. And then, from the darkness, she heard it, a faint, chilling whisper, barely audible above the rustling of the leaves. A whisper that seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. A whisper that seemed to echo the words she'd extracted from the static: sacrifice, moonlight, the old ways. The whispers began to coalesce into a chilling chorus, a cacophony of fear that echoed around her, closing in, threatening to engulf her in its spectral embrace. Sarah knew, with a chilling certainty, that she was not alone in the clearing. The journey into the heart of Willow Creek's darkness had only just begun. The grainy images flickered on her laptop screen, each frame a painstakingly enhanced slice of the Channel 3 static. Sarah squinted, her eyes tracing the contours of a distorted face, its features warped into a grotesque parody of human emotion. It wasn't just a random anomaly, the face seemed to shift and morph, its expression contorting with a disturbing fluidity. The image was overlaid with swirling patterns, dark tendrils that pulsed with an almost organic energy. She captured screenshots, meticulously labeling each frame, cataloging the subtle changes in the face's expression and the shifting patterns surrounding it. Next to the monstrous face, she had cataloged a series of symbols, eerily reminiscent of those in the Blackwood Housebook. Twisted serpents, stylized human sacrifices, and other unsettling glyphs pulsed and writhed across the screen, a morbid dance of distorted imagery. The symbols, though fragmented and distorted by the static, were unmistakably the same. The connection was undeniable. This wasn't random noise, it was a deliberate, malevolent message. The audio proved just as disturbing. She'd spent hours isolating and enhancing the whispers from the static's crackle, painstakingly piecing together fragmented phrases and words. The words were few and cryptic: sacrifice, moonlight, the old ways, bloodstone, forgotten path, but they spoke volumes, painting a chilling picture of ritual, secrecy, and something ancient and profoundly evil. The fragmented nature of the words felt deliberate, like a cryptic puzzle designed to challenge and frustrate the listener. Yet, there was a sinister coherence to it all, a chilling symphony of dread woven into the fabric of the static. Sarah knew she needed expert help. She reached out to Dr. Alastair Reed, a renowned cryptologist and professor of digital forensics at the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Reed, initially skeptical, agreed to examine her findings after Sarah sent him a heavily redacted package of her work. The professor, intrigued by the sheer strangeness of the data, agreed to meet her. Their collaboration became a frantic race against time. Dr. Reed, with his advanced software and expertise in signal processing, was able to isolate the audio frequencies and analyze the subtle variations in their amplitude and frequency. He noticed patterns within the noise that were too complex to be random. The patterns were consistent with a form of complex steganography, a method of concealing information within seemingly random data. He spent weeks immersed in the data, running advanced algorithms and deploying various decryption techniques. Slowly, painfully, they began to uncover the hidden message within the static. The whispers, the images, and the symbols were not simply a random collection of disturbing visuals, they were carefully crafted elements of a larger, far more sinister communication. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Dr. Reed discovered a series of embedded digital signals concealed within the audio's frequency spectrum. The signals were encoded using a sophisticated algorithm, a cipher so complex that it would have been impossible to decipher without his specialized software. Deciphering it was a meticulous process, requiring countless hours of work. The decoded message was chilling. It consisted of a series of geographical coordinates, accompanied by a string of seemingly random alphanumeric characters. The coordinates led to several locations within a 20-mile radius of Blackwood House, each site marked on a faded map Sarah had found tucked inside the ancient book. The alphanumeric characters, after further analysis, proved to be a complex code, a series of dates, each associated with a missing person case from the surrounding area. The dates corresponded to the disappearances of 5 individuals in the past 5 years. Sarah's blood ran cold. The victims were all young adults, and the cases were all classified as cold cases. The disappearances initially seemed unrelated, but now, linked to the disturbing images and whispers extracted from the static, Sarah could feel a deep, chilling connection between them. The static wasn't just a communication, it was a perverse record of a horrifying ritual. The realization sent a tremor of fear through her. This wasn't just a ghost story, this was something far more sinister. Something ancient, something deeply embedded in the fabric of Willow Creek. The decoded message also revealed fragments of a chilling narrative, a story of a dark cult, a series of human sacrifices under the moonlight, and an ancient ritual rooted in pagan beliefs. The coordinates Sarah and Dr. Reed discovered were not simply random locations. They formed a pattern, a ritualistic pathway leading to a final destination, a remote location deep within the Blackwood Forest, far removed from any trail or habitation. This was no coincidence. This was a deliberate map, a guide to a horrific undertaking. As Sarah and Dr. Reed meticulously pieced together the puzzle, they found themselves entangled in a web of darkness, a conspiracy that stretched back generations. They uncovered whispers of forbidden rituals, sacrifices to ancient deities, and a secret society whose members were seemingly interwoven into the fabric of Willow Creek's society. Armed with this newfound information, Sarah knew she couldn't act alone. She contacted the local sheriff's department, presenting her findings. Sheriff Brody, initially skeptical, agreed to investigate after seeing the evidence, but he was noticeably apprehensive, as if he knew more than he let on. There was a palpable unease in his voice, a hint of fear masked by a professional demeanor. He had already heard rumors of strange occurrences, strange happenings in Blackwood Forest. Meanwhile, Sarah continued to analyze the static. She was certain there was more hidden information, but unraveling it proved to be exceedingly difficult. The algorithm was complex and layered, a multidimensional puzzle box embedded within a sea of white noise. But Sarah was relentless in her pursuit of the truth. Each small discovery served to fuel her determination. The fear was palpable, yet the lure of the unknown was too compelling to resist. Days bled into weeks. Sarah's initial fear gave way to a chilling sense of determination. She knew that the deeper she delved into this mystery, the more dangerous it would become. But she couldn't stop. She had to uncover the truth, to understand the nature of this sinister entity and the nature of the evil that lurked beneath the seemingly placid surface of Willow Creek. The relentless pursuit of truth pushed her to confront the terrifying reality of what lay hidden within the static's cryptic message, the message hidden in plain sight for decades. This time, it wasn't just a game. It was a fight for survival, a fight against the encroaching darkness. The next step was to follow the coordinates, to follow the path laid out in the static, and to confront whatever awaited her in the heart of the Blackwood Forest. The journey had only just begun, and the whispers were getting louder. The decoded coordinates, initially seemingly random points on a map, began to coalesce into a chilling pattern. Sarah, hunched over her desk, littered with printouts of the decoded message, traced the points with a trembling finger. They weren't just scattered locations, they formed a distinct, almost ritualistic pathway winding through the Blackwood Forest. Each point corresponded to a location mentioned in the ancient book, places like the Whispering Falls, the Bloodstone Ridge, and the Forgotten Grove. These weren't just names, they were places identifiable on old maps and faintly recalled in the local lore. Dr. Reed, ever the pragmatist, initially dismissed the idea of a ritualistic pathway as coincidence, attributing it to the random nature of the encoded message. But as Sarah pointed out the eerie convergence of the coordinates with the cryptic descriptions in the Blackwood House book, even his skepticism wavered. The book, he admitted, was far more than just a collection of occult symbols. It was a detailed chronicle of a dark and forgotten history. A history that seemed inextricably linked to the disturbing images and whispers hidden within the Channel 3 static. The central point of the pathway, the final destination, led to a location marked on the map only as the old Blackwood House. This wasn't the imposing mansion Sarah had initially investigated. This was a smaller, more dilapidated structure situated on the outskirts of town, almost entirely swallowed by the encroaching forest. Local legend painted it as a place of ill repute, a place where strange things happened, where whispers in the night held a sinister undercurrent. Tales of unsettling noises, unexplained lights, and disappearances had circulated for generations, dismissed as mere folklore until now. Sarah dug deeper, exploring the town's archives, poring over decades-old newspaper clippings and police reports. She discovered a pattern of strange occurrences linked to this old Blackwood house, incidents ranging from unexplained property damage and livestock mutilation to reports of strange sightings and unsettling encounters. Many of these incidents had been dismissed as pranks or natural events, but when considered in the context of the decoded message, they took on a sinister new significance. One particularly disturbing report detailed the disappearance of a young boy in 1957, a case that had baffled investigators and remained unsolved. The boy, a local farmhand named Thomas Ashton, vanished without a trace near the old Blackwood house. The report mentioned odd symbols found carved into a nearby tree, symbols strikingly similar to those Sarah had meticulously catalogued from the Channel 3 static. The unsettling discovery sent a shiver down her spine. This wasn't just a coincidence, it was a chilling echo of something far more sinister. Further investigation revealed that other disappearances, some dating back centuries, were clustered around the same location. These weren't isolated incidents, they were a recurring motif, a dark thread woven into the fabric of Willow Creek's history. Sarah and Dr. Reed painstakingly documented each case, comparing timelines, details, and witness accounts, looking for any common thread, any evidence that would shed light on this disturbing pattern. The similarities were striking. Most victims were young adults, usually alone or in small groups, venturing into the Blackwood Forest. Many reports mentioned strange noises, disorienting feelings, and a pervasive sense of unease before their disappearance. In some cases, witnesses reported seeing strange lights, shadowy figures, or inexplicable phenomena in the vicinity of the old Blackwood house. This was not random, it was a recurring pattern, suggesting a deliberate, malevolent force at work. They found old photographs and faded maps depicting the old Blackwood house in its prime, a stately manor surrounded by well-maintained gardens. But time, neglect, and the encroaching forest had transformed it into a ruin, a crumbling testament to a dark and forgotten past. The once grand estate was now a skeletal husk, its windows dark and empty, its decaying structure a silent sentinel guarding a secret buried within its shadowed depths. The more Sarah and Dr. Reed investigated, the more they realized they were dealing with something that transcended simple crime. This was something ancient, something rooted in the very soil of Willow Creek. The whispered legends, once dismissed as local folklore, were now taking on a terrifying new reality. They were fragments of a larger, more sinister narrative, a story of ritual, sacrifice, and an evil that had lain dormant for centuries. The decoded message was not just a map, it was a historical record, a chilling account of events dating back centuries, revealing a disturbing history of human sacrifice and occult rituals performed in and around the old Blackwood house. The dates encoded in the alphanumeric sequence aligned perfectly with historical records of unexplained disappearances, suggesting a continuous pattern of ritualistic killings stretching back generations. Sarah felt a growing sense of dread. This wasn't just a missing person case, this was a centuries-old conspiracy, a dark secret hidden in plain sight. She and Dr. Reed were venturing into dangerous territory, a realm where the lines between reality and nightmare blurred, where the shadows held secrets best left undisturbed. Sheriff Brody, having initially been skeptical, began to show signs of genuine fear. His hesitation had intensified. He had personally known some of the missing individuals. He had grown up hearing the old tales, the whispers around the old Blackwood house. It had always seemed like superstition. Now, the evidence was inescapable. He knew the truth lay hidden beneath decades of fear and hushed silence. The whispers that had once been merely unsettling now sounded like a death knell. Sarah, armed with this new knowledge and growing sense of foreboding, realized she was facing a formidable adversary. The static was more than a cryptic message, it was a warning, a chilling prelude to the horror that awaited them in the heart of Blackwood Forest. The trail had led them to a point of no return. The old Blackwood house awaited, and the whispers were growing louder, more insistent, more menacing. The fight for survival had truly begun. The game was no longer just a game, it was a battle against a force far older and more powerful than they could have ever imagined. And the next step was to confront the heart of that darkness. The rusted gate groaned a mournful protest as Sarah pushed it open, the sound echoing eerily in the oppressive silence of the Blackwood forest. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and decaying vegetation, a cloying sweetness that hinted at something far more sinister. The old Blackwood house loomed before them, a skeletal silhouette against the darkening sky, its decaying timbers clawing at the encroaching trees like gnarled fingers. Even from a distance, it exuded an aura of decay and despair, a palpable sense of wrongness that prickled the skin. Dr. Reed, ever the skeptic, adjusted his glasses, his usually confident demeanor subtly tinged with apprehension. "This place," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper, "it's unsettling." Even his scientific mind couldn't fully rationalize the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to cling to the very air. It felt as though unseen eyes were watching them, judging, waiting. As they approached the house, the silence intensified, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig under their feet. The closer they got, the stronger the feeling of dread became, a suffocating weight pressing down on their chests. Sarah could feel her heart pounding, a frantic drumbeat against the backdrop of the unnerving quiet. She gripped her flashlight tighter, the beam cutting through the gloom, revealing only fragments of the house's decaying grandeur. The front door, hanging precariously on its hinges, swung inward with a mournful creak, revealing a gaping maw of darkness. A chill, deeper and colder than the autumn air, seeped from the interior, raising goosebumps on Sarah's arms. Hesitantly, she stepped inside, the beam of her flashlight dancing nervously across the crumbling walls and decaying furniture. Dust motes swirled in the faint light, like tiny specters dancing in the gloom. The interior was a chaotic jumble of decay and debris. Collapsed ceilings, broken furniture, and layers of dust and cobwebs formed a suffocating blanket over everything. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and decay, punctuated by an underlying aroma that Sarah couldn't quite place, something earthy, something ancient, something disturbingly organic. They moved slowly, cautiously, each step echoing unnaturally loud in the cavernous space. The silence, oppressive and all-encompassing, was punctuated by strange creaks and groans from the settling structure, sounds that seemed almost deliberate. It felt as though the house itself was breathing, its decaying timbers exhaling a sigh of ancient sorrow. In one room, they found a collection of old photographs, their images faded and blurred by time, depicting a once grand estate, bustling with life and laughter. The contrast between these images and the present state of the house was jarring, a stark reminder of the decay that had consumed it. Amongst the photographs, Sarah found a faded diary, its pages brittle and yellowed with age. The diary belonged to Eliza Blackwood, the last known resident of the old Blackwood house. Its entries, scrawled in a spidery script, detailed a life steeped in superstition and fear. Eliza described strange occurrences within the house, unsettling noises, disembodied whispers, and fleeting glimpses of shadowy figures in the periphery of her vision. She wrote of a growing sense of dread, a feeling of being watched, of being hunted. As Sarah read further, she uncovered a disturbing pattern, entries detailing disappearances, unexplained events, and a mounting sense of paranoia and desperation. Eliza's writing became increasingly frantic, hinting at a malevolent presence within the house, a force that seemed to be feeding on fear and despair. Her final entry was a chilling scream, abruptly cut short, leaving Sarah with a feeling of icy dread. In another room, they found a collection of occult symbols, painstakingly carved into the walls and furniture, symbols eerily reminiscent of those Sarah had painstakingly deciphered from the Channel 3 static. The symbols, in their context, were not merely decorative, they were part of a ritual, a dark invocation of something ancient and malevolent. As they ventured deeper into the house, the supernatural disturbances intensified. Objects moved on their own, unexplained whispers echoed through the empty rooms, and icy drafts swept through the house, despite the absence of any visible openings. The temperature seemed to plummet at random, sending shivers down their spines despite their layers of clothing. One particularly unsettling incident occurred in the basement. As they descended the creaking stairs, a wave of intense cold washed over them, and a low, guttural growl echoed from the depths of the cellar. Dr. Reed instinctively raised his hand, blocking Sarah from moving further. They stood there in stunned silence, listening to the unnerving sound, a primal growl of something ancient and malevolent. The beam of Sarah's flashlight danced across the damp, cold walls, revealing a series of crudely drawn symbols, more of the same unsettling markings they had found elsewhere in the house. They realized that the symbols formed a complex pattern, a ritualistic diagram of some terrifying nature. And then, in a moment of blinding terror, a pair of glowing red eyes appeared from the darkest recesses of the basement. The eyes, piercing and malevolent, seemed to burn into their very souls. A guttural growl resonated from the darkness, followed by a chilling whisper that slithered into their minds. "You should not have come here." They fled the basement, stumbling back up the stairs, a torrent of primal fear driving their desperate escape. The house seemed to twist and writhe around them, its decaying timbers groaning in a symphony of impending doom. As they burst out into the relative safety of the night, the house's eerie silence seemed to pursue them, a menacing presence they couldn't shake off. The encounter left them shaken, their initial skepticism replaced by a bone-deep understanding of the horror that lurked within the old Blackwood house. The investigation had transcended the realm of the mundane. They were now immersed in the chilling reality of the supernatural. The experience had left both Sarah and Dr. Reed utterly changed. The academic theories and rational explanations were no longer sufficient to grapple with the raw, visceral terror they had just endured. The whispers of Blackwood Forest, once dismissed as folklore, were now a deafening scream echoing in their minds. They had found what they had been seeking, but the discovery had come at a terrible cost. Their quest to understand the static on Channel 3 had plunged them into a world far darker, far more terrifying than they could have ever imagined. The game had changed, and they were now playing for their lives. The pursuit of truth had turned into a desperate struggle for survival against a force that was ancient, powerful, and utterly indifferent to their fate. The path ahead was unclear, filled with unforeseen dangers and the ever-present threat of the unseen. But one thing was certain, they would not give up. They had to uncover the secrets of the old Blackwood house before the darkness consumed them completely. The hunt was far from over, it had only just begun. The whispers of the Blackwood Forest would not be silenced. The diary's final entry, a frantic scrawl that ended abruptly mid-sentence, had sent a chill down Sarah's spine. But it was the discovery in the basement that truly shattered their remaining vestiges of rational thought. Tucked away in a dark corner, behind a crumbling stack of decaying crates, was a device unlike anything either Sarah or Dr. Reed had ever seen. It resembled a complex piece of antiquated radio equipment, its brass casing tarnished with age and grime, tubes glowing with an eerie inner light. Wires snaked out from the back, disappearing into the darkness of the cellar walls, seemingly embedded within the very structure of the house. Dr. Reed cautiously approached the device, his hand hovering over it as if hesitant to touch something sacred or cursed. The air around it hummed with a low, almost imperceptible energy, a subtle vibration that resonated deep within the chest. It was the source of the static, the relentless, disturbing interference that had plagued Channel 3, and quite possibly much more. This wasn't merely a broken piece of equipment, it felt malevolent. It pulsed with a dark energy, a palpable sense of dread that radiated outwards, chilling them to the bone. Sarah carefully examined the device's intricate workings. She recognized some components, but many were completely alien, suggesting technology far beyond anything she'd ever encountered. The symbols carved into the brass casing matched those found throughout the house, the occult markings that suggested a ritualistic purpose. She traced a finger along the strange glyphs, their cold, metallic texture sending a shiver down her spine. These weren't just random symbols, they were meticulously arranged, part of a complex system, a language she was only just beginning to understand. As Dr. Reed carefully disconnected a few wires, a low groan emanated from the device, accompanied by a surge of static that crackled through the air, making their hair stand on end. The air in the basement grew colder, and a foul odor, a mix of ozone and something ancient and indescribably foul, filled their nostrils. The flickering light of Sarah's flashlight danced erratically, casting grotesque shadows that writhed and twisted on the walls. Suddenly, a whispering voice, barely audible yet piercingly clear, slithered into their minds, a voice that seemed to emanate from the device itself, from the very fabric of the house. It was a chilling, almost seductive whisper, laced with an undercurrent of malicious intent. It spoke not in words, but in emotions, in raw, primal fear and despair. It felt like a direct intrusion, a violation of their very being. It was the voice they had heard in the static, the voice that had haunted their dreams. Dr. Reed, despite his scientific skepticism, felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He stumbled back, his face pale, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning horror. The device pulsed again, emitting a harsher burst of static, momentarily blinding them with a flash of white light. When their vision cleared, the device seemed to have undergone a transformation. The brass casing glowed with an infernal light, the symbols etched into it seeming to writhe and shift before their eyes. The low, guttural growl that had preceded their discovery in the basement intensified, resonating through the very foundation of the old Blackwood house. A bone-chilling wave of icy air swept through the cellar, extinguishing Sarah's flashlight and plunging them into absolute darkness. They were surrounded by the raw, palpable fear that emanated from the device, a fear that was ancient, primal, and terrifyingly real. They felt a presence, something unseen yet overwhelmingly real, closing in on them. It was a sentient entity, a malevolent force feeding on their fear, their terror, their very life force. The whispers in their minds intensified, no longer subtle suggestions but harsh, commanding voices, voices that echoed the terrifying static from Channel 3. It was no longer just about the static, it was about control, domination, and the absolute subjugation of their wills. They stumbled through the darkness, desperately seeking an escape, their hands outstretched, desperately grasping at anything solid, their breaths catching in their throats. They were lost, not just in the dark confines of the cellar, but in a realm of pure, unadulterated horror. The air crackled with energy, the silence punctuated by the insidious whispers, the guttural growls, and the ever-present, oppressive weight of dread. Finally, stumbling blindly, they found the stairs and clawed their way back to the relative safety of the upper floors. But the terror didn't end there. As they scrambled out of the Blackwood house and into the night, the static intensified, filling their ears with an unbearable cacophony. It wasn't merely sound, it was an assault on their senses, a raw, visceral invasion of their minds. The oppressive silence of the forest seemed to amplify the static, the sounds wrapping around them, becoming a part of them. They didn't stop running until they reached the edge of the forest, collapsing onto the damp earth, gasping for breath, their bodies shaking with exhaustion and terror. The static lessened, but not completely, a persistent reminder of the horrifying discovery they had made. The source of the static was not merely a machine, it was a gateway, a conduit for something far older, far more malevolent than they could possibly comprehend. It was an entity that used technology to expand its influence, spreading fear and despair across the world, and they were only just beginning to unravel its chilling reality. The next morning, the news was filled with reports of unusual occurrences, unexplained power outages, strange radio signals, mass hysteria in small towns, and a wave of uncharacteristic, aggressive behavior sweeping across the globe. They were no longer dealing with a local mystery. The ripples from the Blackwood House's dark secret were spreading across the world, like an insidious contagion. The whispers from the forest had grown into a worldwide chorus, a chilling symphony of fear orchestrated by something ancient and truly evil. The hunt had changed. It was no longer about understanding the source of the static. It was about stopping it, about preventing the darkness from consuming everything. The game was on, and the stakes were higher than they had ever imagined. The world was changing, and not for the better, and Sarah and Dr. Reed were at the very heart of a terrifying global storm, a storm that they knew, with a chilling certainty, they were far from ready to face. The fight had begun, and it would be a long and arduous struggle against a foe that played on the deepest fears of mankind, a foe that hid in the shadows, waiting, watching, and always listening. The whispers had become screams, the static a deafening roar, and the world held its breath. The true horror had only just begun.
If you've made it this far, you've heard the whispers. The static doesn't lie. If something felt too close tonight, it probably was. Subscribe for more tales that reach through the dark. Drop a comment below. What time is it right now where you are? And who's watching with you?